rural versus urban, men versus women, girls versus boys. And it identified data gaps, for example, on micronutrient deficiencies. It looked into policies, identified policy gaps or implementation shortfalls at the local level. And it looked into initial effects of COVID-19. Based on this review and an external evaluation of the previous program, as well as the government plan, the RPJMN, and the UN framework, the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, WFP formulated its new country strategic plan for 2021 to 25. This plan will continue to focus on engaging in policy dialogue and technical assistance in the areas of number one, evidence generation on food security and nutrition. Number two, emergency preparedness and response, including adaptation to climate change. And number three, nutrition through the promotion of diverse and healthy diets to prevent stunting and other forms of malnutrition. As we will hear later this morning, challenges remain for food security in Indonesia because of poverty and a lack of diverse diets. There is a strong focus on rice consumption and increasing consumption of processed food high in carbohydrates, sugar, salt, and trans fat. We still have close to 10% poor people here, which, because of the high population figure, are 25 million people. And the COVID-19 crisis will have increased this number. Already in 2017, the Cost of Diet study concluded that about 1/3 of Indonesians cannot afford a diversified, healthy diet. This is what the government, farmers, processing businesses, civil society, and all of us will now have to work on. WFP will do this together with the government and many other partners, including the so-called Rome-based UN agencies, FAO and IFAD, with which we have a joint plan. This focus on diversified food production and consumption of healthy diets as part of a healthy lifestyle promoted by the government under Germas will contribute to addressing the growing triple burden of malnutrition in Indonesia, where still 7 million children below 5 years are stunted, that is chronically malnourished, and more than 2 million children are wasted, that is acutely malnourished, and where at the same time a growing number of adults, adolescents, and older children are overnourished or obese, while micronutrient deficiencies are assumed to be high. We only have representative data for anemia, which affects every second pregnant woman. The COVID-19 pandemic is now likely to have increased the nutrition challenges. WFP highly appreciates the review and analysis undertaken by SMERU under the leadership of Director Ibu Widjajanti and the lead researcher Pak Sirojuddin. It has looked at various dimensions of food security and nutrition, highlighting progress and remaining challenges, as well as offering recommendations on the way forward. We hope that the outcome of this strategic review will be useful for policymakers and other food security and nutrition stakeholders in Indonesia, as it has been for WFP, in defining the contributions we can make towards leaving no one behind on the road to SDG 2, zero hunger. We look forward to listening to the keynote speech and the contributions of the panelists, as well as discussions with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Christa Räder, for your opening remark. Now, Mr. Iván will deliver the second opening remark. The floor is yours, Mr. Iván.
You're still muted, Iván.
Thank you, Pa. Sorry. Selamat pagi and good morning to everybody. Pak Bambang Widianto, Ibu Kirana Pritasari, Pak Elan Satriawan, Pak John McCarthy, Ibu Monica Widjajanti, moderator of the event, Ibu Widjajanti Isdijoso, director of SMERU, Pak Sirojuddin Arif, SMERU, dear colleague and friend Christa Räder, representative of the World Food Programme, dear members of the Knowledge Sector Initiative, and dear participants in this webinar. First of all, I would like to thank SMERU Research Initiative and the World Food Programme in the person of her country representative, Christa Räder, for inviting me to be part of this very, very important event. All we know that Indonesia is facing one of the most and complex challenges that most of the developing countries face. This is undernutrition with all its consequences, simultaneously with malnutrition and overweight due to mainly the bad quality of a lot or a big portion of the food that is consumed. This is not particular to Indonesia. Unfortunately, this became a feature of most of our developing countries. The situation is at the moment even worsened due to the COVID-19 situation or pandemic, which is affecting strongly the distribution of food products, the access to labor, to inputs, to produce more food, and therefore limits and reduces the potential to continue producing mainly healthy food with the obvious impacts on food security and nutrition. In this context, however, and I don't want to be over-optimistic, as if it works on the field with small farmers directly, one important feature that we see is that in many cases, in Indonesia, in the region, and in other regions, many small farmers and an important portion of rural population is somehow going back to traditional and often more nutritious food, and is being guided in their productive and consumption decisions by the real potential to produce it and consume what they usually used to do. Again, I don't want to be over-optimistic with this because anyway, COVID has a huge negative impact and effect on food consumption and food production at all levels in all sectors of the society. But in what I am somehow optimistic is in the fact that I sincerely believe that COVID will last, but it won't be forever. So that one of the main learnings for us in this situation is that we have to continue helping small farmers, rural and urban population to be more and more resilient to climate and productive shocks. And this is one of the main objectives for IFAD that works together, proudly works together with the World Food Programme and with FAO. With whom, as being the three United Nations specialized agencies in food production and nutrition, are working together under a sustainable food systems approach that goes from primary production to consumption of healthy and nutritious food. Being at the end of the day, or at the end of the chain, the improvement of the quality and quantity of the food consumption, the main objective. All the production side is essential, and IFAD works mainly on that, jointly with the distribution, the processing, the trading, etc. But the main objective, the main and final objective, is to contribute to increase and to improve the nutrition of the population, urban and rural. In this regard, as already mentioned by the World Food Programme representative, we are working together in a joint strategic plan that has as the main axis exactly the strengthening of sustainable food systems, which is strongly consistent with the findings of the report that is being presented today, aimed once again at improving the food security and nutrition as part also of one of the key sustainable development goals, which is zero hunger. I want to conclude my remarks thanking again for this invitation and highlighting that I am sincerely glad to be present in this event in order to learn more from the strategic review that is going to be presented and discussed today. Thank you very much. Selamat pagi and terima kasih everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iván. Now I will give the floor to Ibu Anti for the report launching. Ibu Anti, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Our honorable panelists, Ibu Christa Räder, the country director of the WFP, Bapak Iván Cossio Cortez, the country director for IFAD Indonesia, our honorable keynote speaker, Pak Bambang Widianto, our presenter and discussant, Pak Sirojuddin Arif, Pak Elan Satriawan, Ibu Dian Propoyekti, and John McCarthy. And also, good morning to everybody that are attending this seminar and launching of our report on the food security and nutrition review on an update. So to give you a bit of background, back in 2014, we have SMERU and the WFP and UKP 4 at that time developed a strategic review of food security and nutrition. I think that time Pak Bambang Widianto also involved a lot in the discussions, and that report was launched in 2015 and highlighting the need for Indonesia to have emphasized attentions to stunting. Yeah. And I think after that, the government have taken a lot of measures to address the stunting problems. And last year, the WFP asked SMERU to make an update on that report. Yeah, since Indonesia have already going to a global have undergone a lot of development and a lot of measures have been taken in place. So we are honored to develop this update. But then in early this year, when we are about to finalize the report, we are struck by the COVID-19 pandemics and everybody is affected. So we delayed it a little bit and put a special chapter to the report about the consequences of the COVID. So that today we are happy to launch the reports, and I think this is today is not only the launch of the report, but we are also delighted to give remarks to WFP that are already winning the Nobel Peace Prize. So congratulate to Christa and other colleagues in the WFP about this Nobel Peace Prize awards. The report, I will not explains the content of the report because Sirojuddin will explains to you later in this morning. But the report will be accessible after this event. So it will be uploaded in SMERU website, and we will give you the link to this report after this session so that everybody will be focusing on these discussions for this morning. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has been contributing to this report. A lot of discussions, various experts that give us their views and opinions, and also a lot of analysis from the central government as well as from East Java and East Nusa Tenggara provinces. I think I will take the opportunity to formally announce that the report will be available after this event, and also announce the beginning of the discussions. Thank you very much for all of the participants, and I will hand over to Pak Bambang Widianto to give a keynote speaker for this event. So the time and place is yours, Pak Bambang.
Okay. Thank you, Bu Anti. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yang terhormat Ibu Christine Räder, Pak Iván Cortez, Pak John McCarthy, my colleague from Knowledge Initiative, Bu Kirana, Bu Widianto, para panelis, reviewer, discussion. Selamat pagi. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the SMERU Research Institute and the World Food Program to invite me to deliver a keynote speech for this important event. I would like also to congratulate the World Food Program who received the Nobel Prize last week. We really appreciate your presence in Indonesia. WFP, I think, is the first UN organization that came to Indonesia. So we really appreciate your collaborations. You've been in Indonesia, I think, since the early 60s, so you are the first that came to Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, Indonesia has made significant progress in terms of decreasing food insecurity, stunting, and also wasting. According to the Indonesian Statistical Agency, the prevalence of undernourishment decreased from 16.5% in 2011 to 7.9% in 2018. This progress cannot be separated from the World Food Program contributions. Since the beginning, the World Food Program has partnered with the Indonesian government to address nutritional issues by focusing efforts on food security and nutrition knowledge management, as well as providing technical assistance to the government of Indonesia. Despite this achievement, our work is still far from done. At nearly 28% in 2019, the stunting prevalence was still very high, with large regional disparities. In 2019, 76 out of 114 districts or municipalities remain vulnerable to food. Moreover, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is likely to increase vulnerabilities and poses challenges to food security's nutrition that may reverse current progress. The government of Indonesia is committed to eradicating stunting due to the consequential impact of the problem not only on stunted individuals but also on society. During childhood, stunting increases the risk of death from infectious disease like diarrhea, pneumonia, and measles. Stunting also has a lasting impact in adult life as it is associated with various diet-related non-communicable disease. Moreover, stunting does not only have negative impacts on the stunted children's health, but also on their cognitive capacities and educational performance. In the long run, this translates to lower economic productivity and slower economic growth in countries with a significant number of stunted individuals. A strategic review conducted by the SMERU Research Institute and the World Food Programme provide us with a comprehensive picture of the complexities of food insecurity and nutrition faced by the Indonesian government. While confirming the importance of stunting reduction, the strategic review highlights other issues that also need to be addressed to improve Indonesian food security and nutrition. Among the key issues highlighted as the result of the strategic review is the triple burden of malnutrition. Other than stunting and other undernutrition-related problems, Indonesia also faces overnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. The prevalence of anemia seen an increase among children, women in recent years. Unfortunately, representative data for other types of micronutrient deficiencies is still lacking. As a result, it is difficult to indicate the magnitude of this hidden hunger problem in a more precise manner. As for overnutrition, the number of overweight and obese people increased quite significantly during the last few decades. Aggravating the problem, Indonesia is undergoing a profound nutritional transition, which shifts traditional diets toward diets characterized by higher carbohydrates, fat, sugar, salts, and processed food intakes, and reduced fruit and vegetables intakes. Such nutritional transition can have a negative health impact as it contributes to the rise of non-communicable disease. This strategic review also revealed the importance of improving Indonesia's dietary diversity. Even though access to food has increased, the population food intake is still far from ideal. Fruits and vegetable consumption are low by international standards, and food consumption is still dominated by carbohydrate. The strategic review also found that Indonesia's desirable dietary patterns does not provide the best guide to achieve dietary diversity and thus varied nutritional intake. Compared to the dietary pattern recommended by the E80 Lancet Commission, for instance, Indonesia's desirable dietary patterns still has too many carbohydrates or cereals components. The challenge to enhance food security and nutrition is further challenged by the outbreak of COVID-19, as stunting results not only from inadequate food intake, but also poor health conditions. Effort to address the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on stunting would also need to pay serious attention not only to food security and nutrition health services, but also health services. The COVID-19 pandemic has had serious impact on the provision of healthcare services, as many village health posts, or what we call it, Pos Pelayanan Terpadu and Posyandu, and community health centers, Puskesmas, were forced to close entirely or reduce their operation due to the pandemic. This implies that new strategies or health protocols are needed to maintain the provision of healthcare services for infants and young children, as well as pregnant and lactating mothers under the pandemic if stunting prevalence is to be reduced. According to the Central Statistic Bureau's estimate, during the first quarter of 2020, economic contraction caused by the pandemic has increased the poverty rate in the country from 9.22% of population in September 2019 to 9.78% in March 2020. This translates to an additional more than 2 million poor people. The economic contraction caused by the COVID-19 has adversely affected people's income and purchasing power. As poverty increased during the pandemic, food insecurity was also expected to increase. During a difficult economic situation like this, nutritional quality is likely to deteriorate as many households struggle to have their basic food needs met. The central government had anticipated this problem by expanding the coverage of social protection program. Out of the 977 trillion that the government has allocated to deal with the negative impacts of the COVID-19 on the economy, almost a third was allocated for social protection program. With this fiscal expansion, the government was able to expand the coverage of the existing programs like the PKH program, the PKH conditional cash transfer and program Sembako, the food assistance program, and launch new programs specifically designed to cushion the negative impact of the COVID-19 to the poor and vulnerable. To fully tackle stunting, efforts to maintain the population food security during the pandemic should be complemented with the similarly important efforts to maintain the quality of nutrition. This does not necessarily translate to an additional funding to the existing social protection programs, since the quality of nutrition often results from the lack of knowledge and awareness of nutritious food and feeding practices. The Strana Stunting plays a key role in leading campaign for nutrition-related behavioral changes to complement the central government effort to expand and strengthening its social protection program. Due to the complexity of food insecurity and nutrition, a concerted effort across the government is needed to tackle both existing and new posed by the pandemic. This entails an active role on the behalf of local governments to enhance local food security and nutrition. A study by the SMERU Research Institute has found that stunting-related expenditures by district or city government were on average less than 2% of the total expenditures for the 2015-2017 budgetary years. Imitating the central government spending patterns, 73 to 96% of stunting-related expenditure by district and city government were used for nutrition-sensitive intervention, namely for clean water, infrastructure construction, and early child education. Meanwhile, spending for the nutrition-specific intervention only hovers around 4 to 27% of the total stunting-related spending. This suggests that local government could play a larger role in complementing the central government stunting reduction effort by focusing on nutrition-specific intervention and accommodating local problems. Enhancing food security and nutrition calls for a cooperation between many stakeholders. It requires not just coordinated effort across ministries, but also beyond, as local government should also take an active role in stunting alleviation. Although great strides were made, Indonesia still has a long way to go, with this pandemic posing risk to reverse our achievement. A deeper and broader commitment to stunting reduction efforts are more crucial than ever. It is my hope that this seminar will contribute to our quest to end Indonesian food insecurity and nutritional problems and to accelerate Indonesian economic growth and development. As all of you know, that one of the stunting reduction pillar is the food security. So I really hope that the seminar will give a lot of input for us. Again, I would like to say thank you very much. And we really appreciate the collaborating effort between WFP and SMERU in conducting this very useful review or research. I would like to say thank you again to Ibu Christa Räder, Pak Iván Cortez, Pak John McCarthy, and also our colleague from Knowledge Initiative. Thank you very much. And I hope all of you will have a very productive seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Bambang Widianto, for the enlightening keynote speech. Congratulations again to SMERU and World Food Program for the launching of the report. And let me echo other colleagues to congratulate the World Food Program for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize this year. Now let's listen to Pak Sirojuddin's presentation for the report findings. To all the audience during the presentation, you can ask questions via the Q&A column. Don't forget to clarify to whom you're addressing the questions. And viewers on YouTube can also type their questions in the comment section. Pak Sirojuddin, you have 20 minutes to give your presentation. The floor is yours, Pak.
Thank you, Bu Monica. So can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, Pak.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Bu Monica. Honorable key speakers, Pak Bambang Widianto, Ibu Christa Räder, Bapak Iván Cossio Cortez, distinguished discussant, Ibu Dian Proboyekti, Pak Elan Satriawan, and Pak John McCarthy, my dear colleague, members of Knowledge Sector Initiative, and all the participants. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank you for attending this webinar. It is really a great honor for my colleague and myself to present the results of our review this morning. I also would like to congratulate WFP for winning the Nobel Peace Prize. I believe it is really well deserved, as WFP has contributed much, not only to the elimination of hunger, but also to the creation of peace around the world. So congratulations for that achievement. Okay, so the title of my presentation today is similar to the title of the report, is Strategic Review of Food Security and Nutrition in Indonesia 2019-2020 Update. I'll talk about the key messages or issues raised by the report throughout my presentation by dividing into several sections. You can look at the detail in the report, which can be downloaded after the presentation. So the goal of the report is fourfold. One is to assess the current state and the progress at the national as well as in the subnational level on food security and nutrition. Second is to identify the gaps in terms of policy, programs, as well as initiative, and also in the data availability and analysis on food security and nutrition. And the third, we also would like to assess the impacts of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition and identify the gaps in the government responses to the problem. Finally, we tried to provide some recommendation or suggested measures for Indonesia to improve the food security and nutrition. So we did the review by systematically conducting several analyses on food security and nutrition, including situation analysis, response, and gap analysis. We conducted interviews and FGDs in Jakarta with key policymakers as well as experts and representatives from non-government organizations on food security and nutrition. We also look at latest secondary data such as Riskesdas, Riset Kesehatan Dasar, food production and consumption patterns, as well as other relevant data like Susanas. We also did fieldwork into provinces in Nusa Tenggara Timur and East Java. So the first province is selected to represent the region with the highest level of stunting, while the second province is selected to look at the region with the moderate level. Other than the fieldwork, we also follow the update on relevant policies and programs, as well as new discourses on food security and nutrition. And in line with the common definition of food security and food security, we focus on three issues, namely food availability, food accessibility, and food utilization. So How is the current state or current progress in food availability? If you see in the graph below, which shows the progress in the way the government improve food production. So the graph shows 5 key commodities. If you see that except in maize and fish, which the graph show clear increases during the last 5 to 6 years, we see here that Indonesia's performance in rising food production is mixed at best. For rice, even though it's quite difficult to create single line because the BPS changed the way they estimate rice production during the period under study, we see that there is a decline in the rice production. Well, it is true that rice production increased between 2013 to 2017, but it decreased between 2018 to 2019. Not only in terms of rice production, our review also shows that rice productivity also decreased during this period. And because of this, not only in rice, in other commodities, import dependency actually remain or even increase in certain commodities. And we also find that domestic production for fruit and vegetable actually do not keep up with the rise of domestic demand for these commodities. In terms of food accessibility, as highlighted by Bu Christa and Pak Bambang, we acknowledge that food access increased quite significantly during the last 5 years. So the number of food insecure people decreased significantly from around 40 million to 20 million. But if you look at the number, 20 million is still large. So there is still a challenge to improve food security. In terms of the nutrition, the review shows that, again, carbohydrate still dominate the food intake. Well, in fact, as economy grows or as the national income grows, usually people will eat less carbohydrate. But the figure shows rice consumption in Indonesia actually increased slightly between 2013 and 2018. From around 96 kilogram per capita per year to 97 kilogram per capita per year. So in terms of the proportion from energy intake, actually the proportion of cereal or rice actually increased from around 65% to 65%. And even though the protein consumption also increased during this period, but the increase is not equal across the income groups. Among the richest quintile, so the consumption is around 85 grams per capita per day. But among the lowest quintile or from the poorest groups, actually it's only about the half of it. And finally, the research does show that actually only around 5% of the population have enough fruit and vegetable consumption. So most of the population lack fruit and vegetable consumption. And to improve the food security and nutrition, it is also important to note that it is only a health body which can absorb the quality of nutrition. So for these purposes, healthcare services, basic health services, especially for women and children, as well as water and sanitation are required. And the data show that the government still need to improve both health services as well as the water and sanitation. So the graph shows that it is true, access to health services improved during the last 5 years. However, if you look at the last graph, the proportion of women receiving and consuming vitamin A actually is quite low. It's only 52% in 2017. And then the proportion of children suffering from helminth infection is also quite large. It's still 28% in 2015. And no less importantly, basic vaccination for all children actually decreased between 2012 to 2017, which means that there is no significant improvement in the coverage of basic vaccination. In terms of clean water and sanitation, data also show that open defecation is still practiced. So out of 550 cities and districts, it is only 23 cities and districts which can be considered as open defecation free. And then access to clean water and sustainable water also unequal across geographical areas, especially between rural and urban areas. In rural areas, it's only 74%, while in urban areas, access to clean and sustainable water around 81.6%. So again, all these indicate that access to clean water, sanitation, and healthcare services need to be improved. And then now we move to nutrition. So it is true that during the last 5 years, nutrition improved quite significantly, as shown by the decline in the prevalence of stunting. However, the last figure, which is 27%, actually is still high by international standard. So international development community suggests that below 20% is the threshold for stunting, and now we still have 27%. Other than this, if you look at the distribution across region, so the prevalence of stunting and also the reduction in stunting is unequal across the region. Most of the region actually still have high or even very high prevalence of stunting. And other than stunting, Indonesia actually also faces other problems of malnutrition. First is that overnutrition has increased in all the age categories except for children below the 5. And then even though people usually associate overweight and obesity with wealth, but actually data in Indonesia shows that it is not only among the wealthy people. In fact, the growth of obesity and overweight is higher among the poorest quintile rather than the richest one during the last few years. And then the obesity is not only confined in urban areas in which sedentary life and then less physical activity are quite common, but it will also spread to rural areas. Secondly, is about hidden hunger. Again, anemia among the children below 5 increased, as well as anemia among pregnant women also increased during the last few years. So now we look at the gap, the response and the gap in the government policies and response to address food security and nutrition. We look at first at the way the government improve food availability. So during the last 5 years, there is heavy emphasis on staple food, that the government would like to achieve food self-sufficiency in rice within 3 years and other commodities within 5 years. Even though this policy have brought some positive impacts on the agricultural production, however, there are 2 things that are worth to note. One is that heavy emphasis on staple food creates some changes in the structure of food production. And the secondly is there is also changes in the allocation of budget within the Ministry of Agriculture, that the budget allocation for staple food increased quite significantly, and the expense of the budget for other functions. So as you can see from the graph here, which shows the growth of the areas of harvest, you see for rice and maize, which is on the right side. So the harvest area for rice and maize increased during the last few years. But if you look at the other sectors, for horticulture, for fruit, for vegetable in particular, actually most of the harvest areas for these commodities decreased during the last few years. And if you look at the regional level, the story is that the drive to achieve rice production, to improve rice production, for some region can be negative, can be counterproductive, because it can drive them away from their comparative advantage. In East Nusa Tenggara, for example, people say that now, even though the province was famous for corn production, now actually buying corn from other provinces become cheaper rather than they produce corn themselves. And then in terms of policies in the agricultural sector, the review also saw that gender inequality still persists in the sector. The graph here shows that overall, female farmers contribute significantly to food production. So not only to food security, but also food production. Overall, they contribute around 23% to the food production. So, but the contribution can vary across different sectors, but overall is 20%. However, in our statistical report, some in many cases, women's role is often under-recognized. And women also have disadvantaged position in securing land ownership as well as agricultural input and credit because of some gender inequality, because of the lack of knowledge and awareness or analysis in the government level and the lower level, or because of the cultures. And then in terms of food accessibility, there are two instruments that government usually use to maintain food accessibility. One is economic accessibility through price policies, as well as social affordability of food. But during the last few years, some evidence show that actually economic or food prices have been rather ineffective due to increased globalization as well as inefficiency and misallocation in the allocation of agricultural subsidies. So in practice, the government relied on social affordability of food price, which is throughout the social protection program like PKH and BPNT. To some extent, the government have improved the nutrition element of PKH and BPNT by adding not only rice but also adding eggs and vegetable. However, it is important to note that nutrition to some extent dependent on people knowledge and awareness. And in terms of program implementation, some research also show that warung not all warung provide the food as recommended by the government. So some warung provide a packet of food in which the program recipient cannot choose. Secondly, the implementation of the social protection program also suffer from problem in terms of targeting because of the some flaws in the database management, which are not updated regularly or not matched across different programs. Now we move to food diversity. So the government have tried to improve food diversity by using what we call pola pangan harapan. But as highlighted by Pak Bang, if we compare between pola pangan harapan Indonesia and other pola pangan harapan and other balanced diet, for example, we see here that the dark blue, which shows the cereal, it almost double from the recommended by international standard. Consequently, the other component, for example, in legumes, Indonesia consumption in legume in Indonesia is much lower compared to international standard. So, according to the Global Food Security Index, Indonesia is ranked 102 out of 113 countries covered by the report in terms of dietary diversity. The score is very low; it's only 19, which is high below the average in around 66. And finally, one of the key points highlighted in the review is that because of food security and nutrition is a complex policy involve several agencies or ministries, the last strategic review suggests that there should be special agency to govern food security and nutrition as a whole, as a food system. However, such institution has not materialized yet. So even though the government have tried to strengthen the institutional support for food security and nutrition by issuing Presidential Regulation number 83, but we see that actually the regulation did not clearly indicate how the central government as well as the local government strengthen the food security and nutrition institution as an integrated system. Secondly, we also see that there is a kind of inconsistency in how the regulation indicate how the structure of leadership, how the structure of institutions should be strengthened. We see that there are two strategic instruments. One is the National Action Plan for Food and Nutrition, and the second is the Stunting. While the former is under the leadership of the Coordinating Ministry for Human Development and Cultural Affairs, the second is under the leadership of Vice President Office. Now we move to the next section, which is about the impact of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition. So, in the context of the declining staple production, so the outbreak of COVID-19 add additional challenges for the government, especially to maintain food supply during the paceklik, especially since the November, December, and early January usually. We often lack sufficient food during this period. So in the context of the declining of production and productivity, as well as there is some suggestion that actually in some areas in the country will face hotter than usual climate. So there would be a challenge to maintain food supply during this period. Secondly, COVID-19 is also expected to deteriorate the dietary quality, especially among the poor and the vulnerable groups, because of the negative impact of COVID-19 on employment, on income. So it is expected that as people are struggling to find their basic need, to find their food, so they might compromise the quality of diet. And finally, evidence also shows that the COVID-19 has significant negative impact on health provision. So as highlighted by Pak Bambang, actually some survey indicate that many puskemas, many posyandu, they reduce their operation or even stop operating entirely. And this will have negative impact on the coverage of services. For example, in terms of the basic vaccination, the recent evidence show that there is a significant decrease in the coverage of basic vaccination for children below the 5. And then in terms of the, we also acknowledge that actually the government has attempted to cushion the impacts of the COVID-19 on the people well-being. But again, if we compare the allocation of the budget for economic stimulus, including for social protection, Indonesia's budget is still lower compared to other countries. Besides, the problem in the implementation, the problem in targeting might affect the effectiveness of the social protection programs to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19. So the question now is what needs to be done then? We see that in terms of food availability, it is important for the government to closely monitor the rice stock as well as to make a more flexible trade policy which allow the government to make adjustment in timely manner. Secondly, it is also very important to maintain the incentive for the farmers so they can increase their production. This might include relaxation in terms of the loan payment for farmers, as well as to make sure that agricultural input are available in affordable prices. In terms of accessibility, it is also important to ensure that all poor and vulnerable groups receive sufficient social assistance. Please be advised that the effect of the COVID-19 are not the same across all the groups. So for example, certain group like female-headed household or disabled groups probably hit harder than other people. And then because of the problem in terms of the targeting, it is also important to update the mechanism to update the database. And also it is also important to inform the regional government to provide assistance, especially if the physical distancing policies is implemented or ended in the certain region. In terms of food utilization, it is also important to maintain basic healthcare services for women and young children, and also to continue the deworming programs even if the school closed because of the pandemic. And it is also important to expand the clean water, especially for poor people and vulnerable groups. And finally, for the nutrition, because the COVID-19 is expected to affect the dietary quality, so it is very important to expand the provision of supplementary food like fortified biscuit or fortified food for the poor or vulnerable household. And also because of the nutrition also depend on the knowledge and awareness, it is also important to ensure that people like posyandu kader or PKH kader, they can improve the knowledge of the program recipients about the importance of nutrition. So the impact of the social nutrition can be maximized on improving the nutrition. So overall, in the final section, let me talk about the overall conclusion and the recommendation. First of all, to summarize the review, it is clear that the Indonesia faces not only undernutrition, not only stunting, but also face triple burden of malnutrition. And also the country has a problem with the dietary diversity. Therefore, the problem, the challenge to improve food security and nutrition is very complex one, which require coordination, which require collaboration between ministers and agencies. However, we found that organizational silos between ministries and agencies may prevent the coordination or integration of programs. So this is another problem that needs to be addressed. And then we also find that there are insufficient monitoring and evaluation, which should loop to the program enhancement. Many programs focus on the delivery, but not how to evaluate the program to improve the next stage of the program. And then the lack of representative data in micronutrient deficiencies is also another problem, which can be a huge challenge for the country to address micronutrient deficiencies. And finally, due to the important role of the women and female farmers in food security and nutrition, it is also very important to address gender inequality in the agricultural sector. So we have several measures as recommendation for the government and Indonesia in general as how to improve the food security and nutrition. And we categorize all the recommendations into three. One is that it is important to address the triple burden of malnutrition and promote balanced diet. So one is by broadening the policy focus beyond the stunting, not only on the stunting and undernutrition, but also on the triple burden of malnutrition. It is important to expand the policy focus to obesity as well as to hidden hunger. And then the secondly is to promote balanced diet to a comprehensive approach, which means that not only should the government improve the communication, mass campaign to improve the diets of the population, but it is also important to ensure that the balanced diet, diversified food is available at affordable prices. So for this, secondly, we recommend that the government need to improve policies in rising food production and improving access to food and food utilization. Related to our second recommendation, it is important for the government to develop what we call as diversified, resilient, and nutrition-sensitive food system. So diversified food can be available at affordable prices for all segments of the population. Number four, because of the budget for social protection is limited, it is important to ensure that the social protection programs are targeting those most in need without one being left. And finally, it is important to number five. It is important to ensure that people have proper utilization of food by expanding access to clean water as well as to sanitation. And in the third category, we suggest that it is important to strengthen gender sensitivity, monitoring and evaluation, and institutional support. So, because of the important role of women in food security and nutrition, the government should make sure that women access to economic activities, to agricultural input, as well as to credit and land can be improved. And then it is also important to strengthen monitoring and evaluation system, which can enhance the policy, look back to the policy improvement. And finally, last but not the least, from all the reviews shows that food security, because of the complexity and multidimensionality, it is important to consider food security and nutrition is a system, is a food system, because of which coordination and collaboration between different agencies, different levels of government will be very important. And in this case, we see that effective coordinative body will be required. This can be developed gradually, for example, by enhancing the existing body, such as the stunting, which is under the Vice President Office. It can be gradually developed by expanding the responsibility and authority of this institution to cover not only the stunting, but also other problems of food security and nutrition. By saying this, I'll stop my presentation, and I look forward to your comment, feedback, and suggestion in the question and answer. Thank you, Bu Monica.
Thank you, Pak Sirojuddin, for the very comprehensive presentation. I suggest that you might want to go to the Q&A column to see any questions that is addressed related to your presentation. And now I will give the time to Pak Elan Satriawan as the first discussant. You have 15 minutes to give your views, and I hope you keep 50 minutes in terms of the timing. Thank you, Pak Elan. The floor is yours.
Okay. So thank you, Monica, and let me speak in Bahasa. Although I prepare actually my slide in English. Yeah. Bapak Ibu semua, khususnya Ibu Christa, Pak Iván, Pak Bambang, para panelis ya, yang kami hormati. Selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dan juga para audiens semua di seluruh penjuru Indonesia yang mendengarkan presentasi ini secara online. Pertama-tama saya ingin menyampaikan terima kasih kepada WFP dan juga SMERU untuk kesempatan yang diberikan kepada saya, bukan hanya pada sesi ini tetapi juga pada tahap sebelumnya di mana saya memberikan masukan, ya, mereview dan memberikan masukan terhadap laporan yang saya kira sangat penting, ya, yaitu Strategic Review of Food Security and Nutrition Indonesia 2019-22 update. Ya. Dan tak lupa saya kira saya ingin juga memberikan selamat kepada WFP atas anugerah Nobel Prize. Saya kira ini pantas memang diterima oleh WFP atas segala upaya yang dilakukan di seluruh dunia untuk mengatasi permasalahan kelaparan dan juga masalah gizi. Ya. Bapak Ibu semua, apa yang akan saya sampaikan ya, di dalam 15 menit ini mencoba melengkapi apa yang disampaikan oleh presentasi utama oleh Mas Sirot ya, mengenai tantangan dalam mengatasi undernutrition di Indonesia. Nah, saya akan mencoba lebih detail melihat pada aspek tantangan, upaya untuk mengatasi tantangan tersebut ya, dalam situasi yang kita hadapi saat ini ya, yaitu situasi pandemi COVID.
Pak Elan, maaf interupsi sedikit. Apakah slide-nya boleh di slideshow?
Ya.
Ya, terima kasih.
Jelas. Oke. Nah, sebelum COVID, saya kira Indonesia sudah menghadapi permasalahan ini ya. Jadi Indonesia punya masalah yang disebut dengan malnutrition problem, yaitu wasting, underweight atau malnutrition, dan juga stunting ya. Ada masalah wasting, saya kira sudah ada perbaikan, kemajuan ya. Kita sudah mencapai angka sekitar 10,2% ya, pada tahun 2018 ya. Malnutrition atau underweight juga kemudian sudah relatif baik, walaupun ruang untuk upaya merendahkannya atau menurunkannya masih juga bisa dilakukan. Nah, yang masih menjadi tantangan adalah stunting ya. Karena stunting pada tahun 2018 kita masih pada level 30,8% ya. Ini angka yang untuk ukuran internasional masih cukup tinggi ya. Walaupun di tahun 2019 SSGI, yaitu Survei Status Gizi Indonesia, itu mengeluarkan angka yang angka stunting di Indonesia sudah pada level 27,7% ya. Jadi sudah di bawah 30% ya. Nah, dan ada satu tantangan lagi sebetulnya, masalah obes ya, dan saya nggak akan kemudian mendiskusikan masalah dimensi lain dari masalah nutrisi ini di sini. Ya. Nah, jadi kita punya masalah ada tantangan nutrisi tersebut ya sebelum COVID. Kemudian awal tahun ini kita punya masalah COVID. Dan hingga saat ini 7 bulan setelah kemudian pemerintah mengumumkan pandemi COVID di Indonesia pada tanggal 15 Maret, hingga saat ini kita masih berjuang, ya, masih struggling untuk menurunkan, mengontrol kasus positif. Karena kasus positif COVID di Indonesia masih pada tren yang terus meningkat, ya. Dan ini secara potensial mengancam upaya-upaya untuk mengatasi tantangan malnutrisi tadi. Nah, apa hubungan antara COVID dan undernutrisi? Saya mencoba untuk kemudian melihat beberapa channel ya atau transmisi bagaimana COVID mempengaruhi masalah malnutrisi atau undernutrisi. Ya. Kita bisa lihat di sini ada beberapa potential transmission. Ya. Jadi COVID bisa kemudian punya efek terhadap ekonomi, ya, dan itu yang kita saksikan sekarang sebetulnya. Ya, ekonomi mengalami pelambatan, kemudian mengalami kontraksi, ya, baik karena external shock, ya, maupun karena internal shock, yang itu kemudian berujung pada penurunan kesejahteraan dari rumah tangga, ya. Dan penurunan kesejahteraan ini, ya, efeknya bisa kita lihat pada penurunan konsumsi, itu akan berefek pada masalah malnutrisi. Ya, itu satu transmisi. Ya. Transmisi lain bisa kemudian melewati juga pada melewati status kesehatan. Ya. Jadi disampaikan oleh presenter utama, ya, bagaimana juga oleh Pak Bambang, ya, dan para Ibu Ifat dan Pak Iván bahwa masalah COVID ini jelas masalah shock kesehatan. Ya. Jadi banyak orang-orang kemudian terkena infeksi COVID, tetapi juga pada saat yang sama terdiscourage orang-orang yang sakit mengalami penyakit lain, kemudian terdiscourage untuk kemudian datang ke rumah sakit atau ke fasilitas kesehatan, sehingga masalah-masalah kesehatan non-COVID juga kemudian berpotensi meningkat. Dan ini juga akhirnya berujung atau berpengaruh terhadap masalah nutrisi. Ya. Transmisi lain bisa kemudian melalui supply chains, ya. Jadi pada supply dari makanan bergizi, ya. Dan ini terjadi karena menurunnya kapasitas produksi di dalam negeri, ya. Walaupun kita masih lihat, ya, pertanian itu adalah sektor yang relatif tumbuh positif di triwulan pertama maupun triwulan kedua, ya. Tetapi secara umum kita patut concern terhadap masalah penyediaan pangan bergizi ini, ya. Dan tekanan internasional di mana kemudian negara-negara pengekspor makanan, ya, ke Indonesia itu cenderung untuk menahan diri, ya, karena untuk memastikan stok dalam negeri mereka juga mencukupi, dan ini berpengaruh terhadap supply chains, ya, atau supply atau penyediaan makanan di Indonesia. Yang itu juga kemudian bisa berujung pada masalah nutrisi, ya. Atau kemudian masalah resource yang kemudian makin turun, ya, baik di tingkat nasional maupun di tingkat lokal, ya. Health supply, health services kemudian juga berubah, ya, menurun operasinya dan lain sebagainya. Ini juga berujung pada masalah nutrisi. Plus kemudian yang terakhir mungkin juga bisa kita lihat pada semua prioritas yang saat ini kita miliki itu kemudian difokuskan pada upaya untuk mengatasi COVID, ya. Yang ini bisa kemudian undermining efforts untuk mengatasi tantangan pada masalah malnutrisi. Jadi ini beberapa transmisi yang saya kira kemudian memungkinkan COVID bisa berpengaruh terhadap masalah nutrisi. Dan dampaknya sudah bisa kita lihat sekarang. Dari rilis BPS di beberapa bulan terakhir, kita bisa melihat misalnya pertumbuhan ekonomi melambat di triwulan pertama, ya, menjadi sekitar 2,94%, dan kemudian menjadi negatif di triwulan kedua, ya. Dan di triwulan ketiga kemungkinan juga masih akan negatif, walaupun mungkin menjadi less negatif, ya. Dan yang mengkhawatirkan atau yang saya kira patut menjadi perhatian kita bersama, sumbangan utamanya dari pelambatan tersebut atau bahkan kontraksi ekonomi tersebut itu dari turunnya kemudian konsumsi rumah tangga. Betul bahwa kemudian investasi dan pengeluaran pemerintah juga turun, tetapi kemudian yang sangat tinggi yang menjadi penyumbang utama dari pelambatan tersebut adalah konsumsi rumah tangga, ya. Dan tidak heran ini yang kemudian berujung pada meningkatnya tingkat kemiskinan bahkan pada awal COVID di Maret 2020 ini, ya. tingkat kemiskinan meningkat menjadi 9,78% ya, menjadi dari 9,22% di September 2019. Nah, angka itu mungkin baru sebagian dari.
Pak Elan, you have 5 minutes more.
Ada juga bisnis shutdown ya, ini Bank Dunia, kemudian Flash dan lain sebagainya. Dan health services yang kemudian juga berubah atau kemudian menjadi menjadi berkurang jam operasinya, dan ini bisa berpengaruh terhadap malnutrisi. Dan ini bisa berujung kepada atau bisa mengancam, bisa memperburuk masalah-masalah yang memang sudah ada bahkan sebelum COVID. Kita punya masalah, kalau menurut Christa, kita punya masalah, ada masalah low birth weight, ada low birth length yang memang trennya meningkat menurut Kesdas 2018, masalah imunisasi yang juga kemudian memburuk ya padahal belum COVID, dan kemudian masalah-masalah lain ya, yang ini sekali lagi kalau jika kemudian tidak diperhatikan, COVID ini justru malah memperburuk masalah-masalah tersebut. Ya. Nah, hal lain ya di luar masalah itu yang kemudian juga harus diperhatikan adalah masalah harga pangan yang selama ini menjelaskan akses ada pangan bergizi dari masyarakat Indonesia, terutama kelompok miskin. Ya. Jadi harga beras dan harga daging yang memang kecenderungan domestik yang memang kecenderungannya lebih tinggi daripada harga internasional. Ini sebelum COVID kita tahu bahwa kemudian harga domestik dan harga domestik cenderung lebih tinggi daripada harga internasional karena trade restriction dan juga karena kapasitas produksi domestik. Nah, after COVID ini bisa kemudian makin memburuk karena kemudian ada masalah logistical disruption. Nah, apa yang kemudian harus dilakukan? Ya, Indonesia sebetulnya sudah melakukan beberapa langkah yang tepat ya. Jadi untuk masalah COVID, untuk masalah nutrition ini kita tahu bahwa kemudian ini harus ditangani secara multisektoral ya. Dan untuk kemudian kerja multisektoral diperlukan kepemimpinan tingkat nasional. Dan Indonesia beruntung pada tahun 2017, Pas Presiden bersedia untuk kemudian menempatkan diri sebagai top leader untuk kemudian memimpin upaya penanganan stunting dan juga masalah-masalah gizi lain. Dan Indonesia sudah kemudian mengestablish juga lima pilar dari percepatan penanganan stunting ini. Ya, ada leadership dan komitmen tadi, ada national campaign dan behavioral change, ada convergence pada tingkat nasional hingga tingkat lokal, ada nutritional food security, ada monitoring evaluation. Isu-isu yang tadi kemudian disampaikan oleh Mas Sirot, saya kira kemudian di sebagian sebetulnya sudah diadres. Nah, tinggal kemudian dipastikan ini tercapai dengan baik ya, karena ini menuntut kualitas implementasi yang baik. Nah, dan kalau kita monitor progresnya dari capaian 5 pilar tersebut, ini saya akan bacakan satu persatu. Kita bisa lihat bahwa capaian 5 pilar tersebut sudah cukup baik ya. Tapi ini laporan hingga awal tahun ini ya. Yang saya kira kemudian situasinya bisa berbeda ya, kemudian proses pencapaian bisa melambat karena situasi COVID ini. Ya. Nah, upaya menangani COVID juga kemudian dilakukan pemerintah dengan memastikan pemerintah dengan mengalokasikan resource yang cukup besar ya, sekitar 690-an triliun, hampir 700 triliun dialokasikan pemerintah untuk memulihkan ekonomi. Dan alokasi terbesar digunakan untuk social protection. Jadi ada menggunakan program-program, mengekspansi program-program yang memang sudah existing seperti PKH, program sembako maupun subsidi listrik, ya, ditambah penerima manfaatnya maupun ditambah nilai manfaatnya, plus kemudian ditambahkan dengan program-program baru. Ada bansos sembako untuk Jabodetabek, ada bansos tunai ya, yang merupakan mensasar kelompok masyarakat yang selama ini tidak menerima bantuan sosial, ya, bantuan-bantuan sosial reguler, plus kemudian ada kartu prakerja, ada subsidi upah, ya, ada bantuan langsung tunai desa, dan kemudian subsidi untuk JKN mandiri kelas 3. Ya. Jadi karena memang menyadari bahwa kemudian COVID ini bukan hanya mensasar atau mempengaruhi secara negatif mereka-mereka yang miskin, mereka-mereka yang rentan selama ini, tapi juga miskin dan rentan baru. Dan pilihan ini tepat ya, karena pilihan mengandalkan social protection merupakan pilihan yang tepat, karena memang studi-studi menunjukkan bahwa program-program perlindungan sosial maupun program-program seperti pemberian makanan tambahan, supplementary food programs, itu terbukti efektif di dalam meningkatkan status gizi. Ya. Ada studi yang kemudian menunjukkan PKH menurunkan stunting, BPNT atau program sembako yang kemudian menurunkan tingkat kemiskinan maupun meningkatkan akses pada protein, ya, khususnya melalui peningkatan konsumsi terus. Dan ada program PNP di zaman 1998 yang kemudian juga menurunkan stunting.
Pak Elan, maaf waktunya sudah habis, mungkin bisa wrap up. Terima kasih.
Jadi saya kira kemudian apa yang harus dilakukan, ya. Social protection adalah satu hal, ya, tetapi juga kemudian yang perlu dilakukan juga perlu aspek-aspek lain, ya. Nah, saya meng-quote rekomendasi dari Global Nutrition Report 2020, ya. Jadi yang pertama adalah memastikan bahwa kemudian program-program penting yang community based nutrition itu kemudian perlu dilanjutkan, ya. Dan dalam situasi COVID ini kemudian memastikan bisa menggunakan digital teknologi, ya, atau cara-cara inovasi untuk bisa menjangkau masyarakat, ya, dalam situasi di mana social distance kemudian diterapkan. Investasi pada agriculture sector, ya, kebijakan-kebijakan pada agriculture sector yang kemudian lebih membuka diri, ya, dan dengan perdagangan internasional, dan pada saat yang sama juga kemudian meningkatkan kapasitas produktivitas pertanian dalam negeri. Kemudian memastikan program-program distribusi pangan, ya, dan safety net programs, ya, melalui seperti school feeding program atau program makanan tambahan, dan tentunya kemudian social protection, dan terakhir memastikan bahwa aspek-aspek kesadaran pengetahuan juga kemudian diteruskan, karena sekali lagi untuk kasus Indonesia khususnya kita tahu dari data bahwa bukan hanya orang miskin tetapi juga bahkan kelompok atas masih punya masalah pengetahuan dan kesadaran tentang masalah gizi ini. Saya kira mungkin saya cukupkan di situ komentar dan masukan saya terhadap laporan ini. Sekali lagi selamat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Pak Elan. Just a reminder to check the Q&A column and see the questions that are addressed to you or may be relevant to your presentation, and indicate whether you want to answer live or you answer directly on the Q&A column. Now, let me give the floor to Ibu Dian. Ibu Dian, you have 15 minutes. The floor is yours, Ibu.
Baik, terima kasih. Saya akan memaparkan ke dalam bahasa Indonesia sehingga memudahkan saya untuk berimprovisasi dan menerangkan lebih jelas apa yang akan disampaikan ini. Terima kasih moderator. Sebelumnya saya menyampaikan ini atas nama Direktur Jenderal Kesehatan Masyarakat dan saya mengucapkan terima kasih pada SMERU yang telah menyelenggarakan acara ini untuk membahas masalah gizi sesuai dengan ketahanan pangan dan gizi. Yang dalam kesempatan ini saya menyampaikan informasi tentang masalah slide berikutnya, tentang masalah pangan dan gizi di negara kita. Slide berikutnya. Outline. Nah, baik. Kebijakan perbaikan gizi untuk mengatasi masalah gizi serta tantangan yang kita hadapi dari sisi ketahanan pangan dan gizi di masa pandemi serta upaya pemenuhannya yang terjadi. Slide berikutnya. Di dalam seperti kita semua tahu bahwa permasalahan gizi di Indonesia ini kita mengkelompokkannya sebenarnya menjadi dua, kelebihan dan kekurangan. Namun di dalam kekurangan zat gizi, kita juga ada kekurangan karbohidrat, kekurangan yang secara gizi makro, atau juga kekurangan dalam zat gizi mikro. Yang dimana kekurangan zat gizi mikro inilah yang menjadi penyebab hasilnya adalah anak-anak dengan status gizi yang tidak baik. Di antaranya adalah stunting, pendek yang diikuti dengan kekurangan kognitifnya. Ini permasalahan kita bahwa tadi juga sudah disebut oleh pembicara-pembicara terdahulu bahwa pada saat ini tahun 2019 prevalensi stunting kita itu 27,67%, sementara untuk wasting kita itu 10,2%. Untuk overweight atau obesitas itu 8% untuk anak-anak, sementara untuk dewasa 21,8%. Sementara untuk kekurangan zat gizi mikro yang berujung pada dihasilkannya anak dengan stunting itu adalah 48,9%, sangat tinggi. Artinya dari 10 ibu hamil, 5 ibu hamilnya anemia, sehingga angka stunting kita juga masih cukup tinggi. Ketika stunting ini tidak ditangani, tidak dikendalikan, tidak dicegah secara awal, maka akan kemudian berujung juga pada berdampak pada kehidupan selanjutnya berupa timbulnya penyakit-penyakit tidak menular. Nah, transformasi sekarang penyakit tidak menular lebih berjalan kepada usia yang lebih muda. Saat ini prevalensi hipertensi 34,1%, stroke 10,9%, sementara diabetes 8,5%. Ini meningkat dari tahun-tahun sebelumnya. Slide berikutnya. Dari berdasarkan studi total diet tahun 2014 terlihat bahwa kualitas total asupan energi masyarakat Indonesia ini berasal dari karbohidrat 243 gram per orang per hari dan protein 61,2 gram per orang per hari. Sayangnya saat ini telah terjadi pergeseran gaya hidup dan pemilihan makanan yang baik di masyarakat pedesaan maupun perkotaan lebih memilih makanan dengan dan minuman dari bahan olahan. Selain itu juga besar masyarakat kita kurang mengonsumsi sayur dan buah. Dari data yang ada dari Diskursus 2018 menyebutkan bahwa 95% masyarakat Indonesia kurang mengonsumsi sayur dan buah. Kurang mengonsumsi sayur dan buah itu dari hampir 100%. Tidak satu orang pun lah kalau bisa disimpulkan seperti itu. Tidak satu orang pun kurang mengonsumsi sayur dan buah. Jika dilihat dari grafik pie ini, terlihat bahwa perbandingannya sebenarnya sudah cukup baik. Konsumsi protein, karbohidrat maupun lemak itu sudah cukup baik perbandingannya 60-15-25. Namun disparitas perorangan itu masih cukup tinggi. Artinya didominasi konsumsi karbohidrat itu beras. Staple food kita beras paling tinggi. Sementara dari data yang disampaikan oleh Pak Ali Komsan menyebutkan bahwa negara Indonesia ini adalah negara tertinggi jika dibandingkan dengan negara Asia lainnya dalam mengonsumsi beras. Kita 115 kg per kapita per tahun. Sementara Malaysia itu 80. Dibandingkan lagi yang paling rendah adalah Korea. Itu 40 kg per kapita per tahun. Sehingga memang perlu untuk kita juga diversifikasikan atau mengedukasi masyarakat untuk mengkonsumsi makanan lebih beragam. Sehingga memang ketika terlihat secara umum, ini secara studi diet terlihat bahwa perbandingannya sudah cukup baik. Namun ketika kita lihat jenisnya, terlihat bahwa yang paling tinggi karbohidrat itu diperoleh dari beras. Nah, ini yang perlu kita lakukan diversifikasi atau edukasi bagaimana membiasakan untuk mengkonsumsi makanan lain selain beras. Slide berikutnya. Ini saya akan lewati slide berikutnya. Nah, ini. Sehingga kemudian cara yang kita lakukan untuk melakukan gerakan masyarakat hidup sehat ini adalah sesuai dengan instruksi Presiden nomor 1 tahun 2017 dengan melakukan hal-hal seperti ini. Meningkatkan aktivitas fisik, kemudian juga lingkungan yang lebih sehat, terus memperkuat pendidikan gizi, tentang pendidikan kesehatan, tentang hidup sehat, terus kemudian juga mengkonsumsi sayur dan buah, meningkatkan konsumsi sayur dan buah, dan lakukan deteksi dini terhadap penyakit. Sehingga ini kita lakukan sebagai bagian dari kita melakukan mencegah terjadinya seperti sebagaimana judul dari presentasi saya hari ini, yaitu overnutrition. Bagaimana kita menengahi antara hidden hunger to overnutrition. Itu adalah dengan cara meningkatkan pendidikan gizi, pendidikan untuk mengkonsumsi makanan bergizi yang lebih baik. Slide berikutnya. Di dalam keadaan pandemi ini, sebagaimana tadi sudah dijelaskan juga oleh Pak Elan, bahwa pandemi ini sudah berjalan hampir sudah 7 bulanan. Artinya pasti akan berdampak secara ekonomi. Kalau berdampak secara ekonomi, maka dalam makanan kita pun juga sangat berdampak keragaman konsumsi kita juga akan sangat berdampak, sehingga juga akan mempengaruhi status kesehatan dari kita semua. Sehingga peningkatan pemanfaatan makanan diperlukan semaksimal mungkin. Artinya apa? Kalau kita mengolah bahan makanan, diolahlah sampai hampir semua bahan makanannya terolah. Misalnya, kita mengolah sayur, yang dibuang seminimal mungkin dari sayur itu. Yang selebihnya yang harusnya kita makan. Ikan, yang kita manfaatkan semaksimal mungkin dari ikan. Yang selebihnya yang dibuang adalah yang seminimal mungkin. Seperti itu adalah sehingga mengkonsumsi sayur dan buah itu dan segala macam protein maupun karbohidrat itu semaksimal mungkin untuk menghindari makanan-makanan yang dibuang. Atau lebih jelasnya lagi, kalau kita menyesuaikan dengan makan sesuai kebutuhan, tidak lapar mata seperti itu. Jadi seperti kita pesan makanan, kita apalagi sekarang secara online, kita begitu melihat gambarnya tertarik, terus kemudian kita pesan semua, padahal yang kita makan tidak semua yang kita pesan. Seperti itu, sehingga meningkatkan edukasi, menyadarkan seluruh lapisan masyarakat bagaimana untuk memanfaatkan makanan semaksimal mungkin. Berikutnya dari edukasi yang perlu kita tingkatkan ini, maka sebenarnya kita juga memiliki pedoman gizi seimbang. Slide berikutnya, di mana pedoman gizi seimbang ini yang ditargetkan untuk semua, baik profesional maupun petugas dari lembaga pemerintah maupun non-pemerintah, untuk melaksanakan intervensi pendidikan gizi. Pesan-pesan yang dibuat juga ditujukan kepada masyarakat umum, di mana pedoman tersebut mencakup pesan khusus untuk kelompok-kelompok melalui siklus hidup. Rekomendasi yang dibawa dari pedoman tersebut adalah tentang makanan yang bermanfaat bagi tubuh dan tidak berbahaya dari sisi kesehatan. Slide berikutnya adalah menjelaskan bahwa di dalam pedoman gizi seimbang tersebut juga kita visualisasikan ke dalam isi piringku, di mana isi piringku ini juga digunakan sesuai kelompok usia untuk jumlah-jumlah bahan makanan pokok. Di dalam pedoman gizi seimbang ini ada 4 pilar yang mesti dipahami, yaitu mengkonsumsi aneka ragam bahan makanan, kemudian kebiasaan hidup bersih dan sehat, melakukan aktivitas fisik, dan memantau berat badan secara teratur. Dan ini dilakukan visualisasinya seperti ini sehingga memudahkan dalam memberikan edukasi. Jadi menjadikan panduan konsumsi menjadi lebih baik. Jadi seperti apa, berapa jumlahnya, dan menghindari overnutrition tadi. Di dalam pedoman gizi seimbang tersebut, next slide, ada 10 pesan gizi yang mesti diikuti. Di mana pesan gizi ini intinya adalah memastikan apakah yang kita makan adalah sesuai dengan kebutuhan, yang diimbangi dengan aktivitas fisik yang cukup, serta menjaga kebersihan diri. Kualitas asupan harus kita perhatikan. Pedoman ini memberikan arahan kepada kita untuk mencapai kualitas asupan yang memadai, termasuk pembatasan konsumsi gula, garam, dan lemak. Sehingga sebenarnya 10 pesan ini juga dibuat untuk individu dalam konteks budaya dan sesuai dengan kebutuhan, kemudian juga mempertimbangkan faktor kesehatan. Slide berikutnya. Nah, ini juga salah satu cara kita memperkaya jenis makanan kita adalah dilakukannya fortifikasi makanan untuk memenuhi kebutuhan mikronutrien. Jadi fortifikasi kita lakukan di garam dengan menambahkan yodium, terus kemudian di tepung dengan menambahkan ada 5 zat gizi mikro, zat besi, zinc, asam folat, B1 dan B2, terus kemudian juga di dalam minyak ditambahkan vitamin A, di dalam beras juga sudah mulai dilakukan fortifikasi berbagai macam zat gizi mikro, dan ini juga sudah diproduksi oleh Bulog. Jadi memang upaya-upaya kita untuk mengatasi masalah gizi dilakukan dengan berbagai macam cara. Selanjutnya, slide berikutnya. Sehingga apa sebenarnya yang dibutuhkan untuk mengatasi permasalahan ini adalah untuk dari sisi akademis ya, dari akademisi memang ada 3 hal yang mesti kita perhatikan, yaitu dari sisi pendidikannya, dari sisi penelitiannya, serta dari sisi pengabdian masyarakatnya. Dari sisi pendidikannya bisa saja mengintegrasikan pembelajaran tentang gaya hidup sehat pada program studi yang relevan dan pembelajaran berbasis bukti lapangan. Sehingga ketika kita memberikan bahan ajar kepada mahasiswa itu juga sudah termasuk di dalamnya hal-hal terkait dengan edukasi di bidang gizi dan kesehatan.
Ibu Dian, 5 menit lagi, maaf.
Siap, ini slide terakhir Mbak. Dalam hal penelitian diperlukan juga dukungan sivitas akademika untuk memberikan bukti khusus terkait dengan peningkatan ketahanan pangan dan gizi, karena dari data yang ada juga konsumsi telur misalnya. Konsumsi telur adalah salah satu bahan makanan yang mengandung zat gizi yang hampir sempurna. Itu juga kita merupakan negara yang masih rendah konsumsi telurnya, padahal jumlah telur kita juga cukup banyak. Nah, ini perlu penelitian terkait dengan hal ini sehingga dapat menjadikan dasar dalam pengembangan kebijakan kita. Untuk melakukan pengabdian masyarakat bisa juga dilakukan dengan membuat area praktek yang tematik. Terus kemudian juga fokus pada hal-hal yang terkait dengan pangan dan gizi dan kesehatan keluarga. Terus kemudian membangun koordinasi dengan pemerintah daerah dalam menginisiasi dan memastikan kebijakan yang berkelanjutan. Jadi dari dalam hal ini dari sisi akademis sangat diperlukan perannya untuk sebagai perpanjangan tangan kami untuk mencapai masyarakat di dalam melakukan edukasi menghindari overnutrition. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan. Terima kasih. Slide terakhir itu adalah ada beberapa di slide terakhir ada QR code yang bisa untuk dilihat bahan-bahan media gizi terkait dengan edukasi gizi yang bisa dilakukan, bisa diperbanyak, bisa di-download untuk bahan media edukasi kepada masyarakat. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Ibu Dian atas presentasinya. Finally, we have Pak John McCarthy. Pak John McCarthy, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Just sharing this. Can you see that okay? Can you
yes,
see
Pak. Yes, Pak.
Okay, so selamat pagi kepada ibu-ibu dan bapak-bapak yang terhormat, dan especially to Pak Bambang, Ibu Christa, Ibu Widjajanti, and my fellow.
Bisa nggak kita buatin slide yang ini Mbak? Slide yang
there's a voice there, I think.
punya bakunya. Sehingga nanti kalau
ada yang belum maaf, ada yang tidak mute, boleh di-mute-kan? Silakan
Okay.
Pak.
Okay, so I'd like to congratulate WFP and SMERU for a really interesting and important report. And it's a great honor to be asked to be a discussant. I very much enjoyed reading the report and I learned a lot from it. And it's a compilation of an enormous amount of research that they've read to compile this report. So Pak Afif and the other authors are really to be commended. I guess in trying to respond to the report, what we can see, I think, is a very paradoxical sort of progress that Indonesia is undergoing. On the one hand, we see decreasing poverty statistics. The number of food insecure households measured in calories is decreasing. The programs to address food security issues are being rolled out and have been making some progress. However, despite all this, we see progress in terms of access to calories, but not in terms of micronutrient deficiencies and stunting not happening as quickly as we would like. We see, if we try and think about the underlying theory of kind of causality that the report suggests is leading to these problems, what I would like to say is the report suggests that it's a combination between, if I'm not making a mistake here, this is my reading of it, focus on the problem of high food prices, the focus on production, and especially rice at the expense of diversity, and the rise of the triple burden of malnutrition. This is leading to the continued domination of carbohydrates in diets. And now we have climate change, lack of access to land, lack of access to financial services, and other things. I could go on and on. So we have a kind of theory of causality here. There's one thing, I think, if we step back from the report and reflect on it, I think what we can see in food and nutritional security is really what policy analysts call a wicked problem. So the problem of food and nutritional security emerges at the intersection of health, poverty, agriculture, and environmental problems. So it's very difficult. So everyone from these different kind of disciplines or different sectoral viewpoints will look at food and nutritional security in different ways. And this means that the causal relations and the interrelated and problems underlying this issue are very difficult to untangle. It also suggests a multidisciplinary approach. So we're not just looking at it from one angle. Bill Pritchard, in his Handbook of Food and Nutritional Security, was published a few years ago, talks about the fact that there are many scholarly communities or policy communities working on this issue and that they don't play to the same tune. It's like a out of tune gamelan or gamelan that's warming up. Everything is kind of bouncing around. And that there are very different specialist pathways to thinking about food security. So what I wanted to do today is to present a view from my disciplinary background, which is, so what I want to think about is what might a sociology of development or an anthropology lens suggest how we might approach this problem. So I'm not trying to downgrade what's a very interesting report, but just add a little bit more to it and reflect on it. So in this Handbook of Food and Nutritional Security, Pritchard argues that if we look at nutritional outcomes, they're really shaped by how food systems work, but also processes of social and economic change. So we need to look at not just the food system, but the socio and economic changes that are taking place in a particular place. So this makes the analysis quite challenging, but I think it's true to what we see in reality. So the report notes, and here are a few quotes from it, poverty is highly correlated with food insecurity, and smallholder farmers, farm workers and fishers are the biggest group who suffer from hunger. But if you think about it, smallholder farming, people without land, tenant farmers and fishers actually suffer or face very different sorts of challenges. And the report suggests that the nature of food security varies across the regions. So this makes me think are we really thinking about one phenomenon, or are there many phenomena? And if it's many phenomena, do we need much more targeted sort of policy approaches rather than a one-size-fits-all kind of approach? So I've been involved in an Australian Research Council project, which we've just been finishing up. And we had collaborators and partners from UGM, from USU, UNCIA, and a couple of universities also in Eastern Indonesia. And what we were doing was searching for reasons in the livelihood landscapes, looking at agrarian change dynamics and trying to understand food security and nutritional security from this perspective. You can see the map there with little dots from where our field sites were. So what we see along with the nutritional transition that's been so well described by Pak Sirojuddin and our other colleagues, other panelists, we also see a livelihood transition taking place. And this livelihood transition is very different in different sorts of production systems. So what we see in a state crop sector, in the rice paddies of Indonesia, what we see in the horticultural sector, what we see in the fisheries are actually quite different in many respects. People are vulnerable and food insecure for quite different sorts of reasons. This doesn't mean we can't look for patterns, however. So the conventional narrative for thinking about how development comes to the countryside, which is developed from the Industrial Revolution in the global north, and I don't think it really applies to Indonesia all that well, but this is how development economists like to think about development. They suggest that we get increasing agricultural productivity, leading to increasing incomes, less poverty and food insecurity, and then people leaving agriculture and moving to the city as the industrial sector takes off. Now, clearly this pathway, this narrative is quite problematic for many parts of Indonesia. These pathways are problematic, and integration of many people into these kind of pathways is also difficult. And in many cases, people have undertaken these sorts of livelihood changes in very adverse sorts of ways. So they might have migrated to the city, or they might have taken up more high value forms of agriculture, but it hasn't got them out of food insecurity necessarily. And the way this works in different production systems is quite distinct. So I don't have time to go into this today, but I had another half an hour I could. So in different contexts, we get people being vulnerable for quite different sorts of reasons. And this suggests that we might think about different sorts of solutions. So in thinking about this, what we saw across our case studies, and this really resonates with the analysis of SMERU and Pak Elan and other people, we get a group that are able to intensify their production, move out of agriculture or migrate to the city successfully and find pathways out of food insecurity. But what we do find at the same time is a large group of people, and we found this in our village surveys and qualitative interviews and poverty ranking exercises, a large group of people that are combining agriculture with labour in the local context, collecting forest products from nature, fishing, they're engaged in sharing arrangements with neighbours and family members, and they're receiving remittances, etc. And in these sorts of ways, what they do is they progress in terms of the statistical proxies that are used, for instance, in the social protection program to measure poverty. However, when you sit with them in their house, they're often cutting back on food for periods of the year. And what you'll see is approximately in many of our places, it doesn't always line up neatly, the number of people that are cutting back on food in scarcity seasons approximates the degree of stunting we find in those districts. This is our preliminary conclusion. Of course, it would need a lot more statistical analysis than we're capable of. But finally, we do get a small group, which I think you find in SMERU's report, of the chronically poor, female-headed households, tenant farmers, landless, the old and disabled, the people that are not getting the calories required for food security, whereas the second group often are typically nutritionally insecure. So what I'd like to think about is a crab moving sideways. These people are not progressing in the way that the narrative we've inherited from the past would suggest, but they're also not crashing. And these are the people that are in our food insecurity lens. So look, this is just a picture, some pictures from some fieldwork I did in Aceh to give you a sense of what this entails. So what we ended up concluding is that the nature of poverty, or relative deprivation, of whatever word you want to use, has really changed as large numbers of people in these different sorts of landscapes have lost their capacity to live off agriculture, for instance, and as livelihoods have got more commodified. So people nowadays need to pay for jajan, for snacks for their children to go to school. They need to fix their roof. These are a matter of pride for rural people and part of the way that they think about their well-being. And so as they take up these consumptive lifestyles, and as the retail sector penetrates even into the remote places with very sophisticated forms of marketing and advertising, we get shifting social needs, changing food cultures. And what we find if we sit down with villagers, that they're making cruel trade-offs where they substitute protein and vegetables for things that provide cheap calories. And often there's ecological decline going on in these landscapes so that they can't harvest in the way they did it in the past. And I think the SMERU report looks at some of the climate change related issues. So if we think about this as a different way of thinking about nutritional problems, it might suggest that we experiment with some different approaches. And I've published some of this in a journal article. If anyone wants to contact me, I can send it to them. So this leads me to pose a series of questions that maybe we could discuss together, because I'm not saying I've got the answers for them. So very interestingly, the report suggests that we need to diversify diets and livelihood, and this is critical. And I couldn't agree more. The question is, how are we going to do this? This is a big research project in itself. We could speculate on different ways of doing it, but the report suggests we need to do that, but it's not really clear how we can do it. The climate issue is clearly critical, and the report talks about reduced production in many systems, and climate change is going to push this to happen more and more. So this is really, I'm not saying it's a climate change emergency, but it's something close to it. We need to start planning for what's going to happen in the past. The report in some way notes the problem of landlessness, that a large number of people don't own their land, and this means that if they're tenant farmers, up to a third of their production goes to the landlord. And this is critical. In some of our surveys, we found the most insecure people are these people, and these are often cutting back on their food. So we need to look at enhancing the subsistence capacity of rural people, and I think large-scale land acquisitions are not helping. So we shouldn't, I think Indonesia should think about a moratorium on large-scale land acquisitions and really think about pro-smallholder policy settings. And the report notes suggests contract farming. Contract farming can be good, but the literature is having a debate. Is it leading to better integration into markets, or is it actually creating poverty? So it depends on all kinds of things. But for sure, helping people to farm, but we also need them to increase their subsistence capacity, and contract farming doesn't always do this. The report notes the lack of awareness of nutritional issues amongst rural communities, and I think this is very true. However, as my last slide suggests, it's much more complex than that. We need to look at why people are cutting back on protein and vegetables. And if you go into the community, you're with the poor, they're cutting back, you go up a little bit in the community to someone who's a little bit off, and they're eating the complete meal. Okay, so it's not just lack of awareness. If they had money, they would do it. So I think, as well as behavioural change, what Indonesia could consider is regulating retail marketing and advertising, and thinking about how these large multinational food companies penetrate into the village. Why don't people go back to the old jajan they had in the past that had more nutritional content? The report suggests that social protection programs, particularly updating and targeting, need to be reformed or somehow changed. but it wasn't clear how, I mean, SMERU has worked on this issue for many years. How would SMERU suggest that we do that? Is it a question of implementation, or is it a problem of design of the programs? That's a theme in the literature, and I'm not sure what SMERU's thoughts are about that. Finally, I've got one more slide after this, but the capacity of the state to cushion all the shocks that are facing Indonesia, I wonder whether it's a bit hard to expect the state to do all this. I think what we need to do is enhance the subsistence capacity of people. And Iván in the introductory comments talked about people going back to these old production systems. I think we have a lot to learn from how people cope with crises and how we can actually help them to do this better. So in conclusion, the report talks about an overhaul of the entire food system. And so I agree with that proposal, but I'm not, and there's a lot of ideas there about how we might do it. But if I was going to add my 100 rupiah to the, or 10 cents to the story, what I would suggest is that food policies can't be seen on their own. They need to be integrated into broader strategies of social policy and economic development. So we need to go to the root of the problem. Why are people in estate crops or oil palm areas cutting back on their food? So we visited some areas just outside Medan where the stunting rate is at between 40 and 50% in those districts. And one of my colleagues from USU did a survey there, and he found that during what they call the musim trek, when the oil production falls, all the landless labourers get less work. The people with very small areas of oil palm and very low production, all cutting back on their food. So this story, how the production system and the land tenure and everything is caught up with why people cut back on their protein, needs to be examined. And what can we do to help those people plant things in there? They used to have, in the Suharto period, they used to have an area where they could plant vegetables and other crops, but they're no longer doing that. So what can we do to enhance their resilience and their subsistence capacity? The second thing is, I think we have to move beyond national programs that focus on Indonesia as a whole and need to address the drivers, in particular production systems and rural contexts. So we need a lot more searching rather than blueprint approaches, I would suggest, if I'm not being a little bit presumptuous. Just being a little bit provocative here, where might we go? And I think that Indonesia has got so many capable researchers and capable, the state capacity for thinking in complex ways is there. So this is perhaps just another way forward. So this, in the work I've been doing with ASEAR on the COVID response, we were thinking about, with a number of colleagues across Indonesia, we were thinking about how could regional governments develop responses that build on local institutions and knowledges. So this is in a report that's going to be released, I think, in next week or so. So how do people cope with the crisis? And so if you go into villages during a Pacek click period, there are certain things that people turn to. How can we help them to grow these things or even grow better ones? One of the things that the climate change literature suggests is that externally driven climate change adaptation programs don't do as well as those that are initiated in local communities based on local knowledge. So there's a lot of interesting learning that we can do in this space. Okay, so that's all I want to say today. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll look forward to having a discussion in the follow-up.
Thank you very much, Pak John. Now we've completed the panel session and we'll move to the Q&A session. I will divide the Q&A session into 3 sessions. For the first session, I will invite the speakers and discussants to select the questions from the Q&A column and then mark questions that you would like to answer them live. For the second session, I will select some questions from the Q&A column to be answered by the speakers. And for the last session, we will answer questions from via YouTube channel. So let's start with the first session. Panelists and discussants, you can check questions addressed to you in Q&A, and please mark questions that you would like to answer live. I will start with questions for Pak Sirojuddin. The first one is how to strengthen the governance of food security and nutrition. And then the second one is there a trend in terms of food diversity index in Indonesia and linkages between environmental degradation and stunting or malnutrition? If you can start answer these two questions. We have 20 minutes for the first session. But Sirojuddin, maybe you can start.
Thank you, Bu Monica. First of all, I would like to thank to Pak Elan, Bu Dian, and Pak John for the critical feedback, comment, question for our report. And indeed, I wish that I can hear from John McCarthy, who put the many of the points raised in the report in the broader scholarly theoretical debate about food security and nutrition. And yes, we agree that to some extent, even though we try to put some latest information on how something can be done, but in the end, we have to realize that many things about this question are simply beyond the scope of our study. So yes, it is true that in many ways the report talk about what needs to be done, what's the problem, and what needs to be done, but how to do that properly is still open to debate, and we hope that the report can open the debate, so we can find better ways how the Indonesian people and how the government can address the problem of food security and nutrition. So now let me move to the question from the participants. One is how to strengthen the governance of food security. So we realize that this is practical but very difficult situation, because we can imagine that yes, there is a certain ideal institution that should be developed to address this problem, but to some extent institutional development should be politically situated. So probably the ideal one will not be implemented, or it's not appropriate for certain reason. So learning from the past experience that the proposal to develop independent institutional body which regulate food and security as one entity, as a food system, even though few years has passed, but the proposal has not been materialized, we realize that probably there is something that needs to be adjusted. So rather than simply stating that, yes, we should develop this institution, we see that we need to adjust to the current bureaucratic and political situation in the country. So we believe that gradually developing such institution by building on the strength of certain existing institution can be a good way to achieve such ideal situation. So what we see is that, for example, now we have the stunting. So if we believe that the food and food security and nutrition should be regulated as a food system, as an entity, so why don't we develop this institution, expand the responsibilities and the authority to cover not only undernutrition, but also other problems, other challenges that we believe we should to address them carefully for a better nutrition food. So that's the way we think how we could strengthen the governance of food security as a whole. We remember from our FGD, so even though we often talk about the food security and nutrition, but actually not until recently do people realize that, oh, we should these two things not from different perspective but from the same angle. So we hope that it is certainly easy to be said, but it's difficult to be done. But now let's think these two things as one thing is a food system. Secondly, the trend in food diversity in Indonesia. So if we look at the PPH score, actually the PPA score is quite good. So the government stated that actually we have achieved the target of PPA score. So in terms of the score, probably people will say we have no problem with the food diversity, but probably the problem is not there. But the problem is lies at deeper problem that probably we should think about our score. Is it already appropriate, or should we adjust the score to consider new development? Probably because the score is rooted in the old way. Probably, I don't know exactly, but at least we know that from the PPH the score looks good. We already achieved the target. But if you look at the report of Global Security Index, Indonesia is put very low, very low, above much below the average. Even though in terms of economy we are doing well during the last 5 years. And if you ask whether there is a trend, where is a rupture or there is a shift in terms of the food diversity, as far as I know, it's not, it seems that the situation has been like this way for many years. So what is just is probably we need to see again how we should develop our food diversity index to give us better guidance how to improve food security and nutrition. That what we see from our side. Thank you, Bu Monica.
Thank you, Pak Sirojuddin, for the answers. Now, let me move to Pak Elan. Pak Elan, there's actually a lot of questions about the effectiveness of social programs that the government have implemented. And would you like to answer questions on the cash transfers? There's a question what is the basis of the 600,000 rupiah in PEN, and whether that amount can help ensure food security. And if you also would like to touch on how the government has been measuring the effectiveness of social programs.
Thank you, Monica. Yes. Well, the question is on the why 600,000 and how the government actually determine the size of that cash transfer. Well, to be frankly, actually, there's no formula in the exact formula actually to determine that 600K. Here, when we're thinking of designing actually that a cash transfer program related to COVID. But what we are thinking is there's some consideration that we think that the sizes actually should be bigger than the regular programs, because this is extraordinary situation. And if you see that the number of or the size of the programs related with COVID is actually in most cases it's larger, and we hope that partial the loss or the reduction of the incomes experienced by the poor and the vulnerable. So again, I think short answer for your question. So there's no exact formula to determine that, but that 600 we think, or government thinks that it will somehow compensate the loss in income or reduction in income. And I think the question on the effectiveness, we haven't had the evaluation of the impact actually on the ground for the current programs, but we're doing some rapid monitoring for different COVID-related safety net, and mostly we're looking at the quality of the implementation. Yes, there are some challenges with regard of the accuracy of the data, the timeliness of the distribution of the incomes, but I think with the with the information that we get from that rapid monitoring survey, the government responded relatively well. And if you assess is actually the issues that raised in the public on the different implementation issues, I think we saw the improvement in the quality of the program over time. We benefited too with some survey conducted by external party, by the World Bank, by the Mandiri Institute. Yeah, we seek the input from them on the different quality of the programs as well as the welfare situation, and that somehow helped also the government to improve the programs. I think in terms of the effectiveness, we need perhaps a year or two actually to see how effective actually the COVID safety net. Although I think in terms of the past impact evaluation, we learned a lot from the past impact evaluation. There are some studies that evaluating the impact of the PKH, the BPNT or program sembako, that give us the lesson learned that the program is actually the right programs to help the poor and the vulnerable in improving their welfare, in protecting actually the welfare, including in the situation that we are facing now. I'd like also to touch perhaps briefly on there's a question on the strategy of the government in updating the beneficiary data, the DTKS, data terpadu kesejahteraan sosial. Yes, there's been some issues actually with the data. We heard a lot the grievance, the complaint is actually with the data, and it's understandable because I think there's been some issues in the updating mechanism so far. Although we don't have any other choice, the government doesn't have any other choice because this is the only data that the government has to address or to target actually and distribute the different social protection program, including the COVID-related safety nets. But Bappenas, MOSA, including us, and BPS actually has been working together for doing the nationwide updating. And when I mention when I say it's nationwide updating, it's not just the improvement on the collecting the data, but we are also trying to refine the way actually to compose the pre-list. We way also to improve the PMT, the proximity test formula, which is the knife is actually to cut the welfare ranking across different groups, so we know the eligibility of the household for different programs. But that's only one side of the improvement. I think what the vice president is also direct us to do, that the targeting system should also have the targeting or self-registration mechanisms. What we know in other country call as on-demand application or on-demand system, where people that is excluded, the poor and vulnerable that remain excluded, can come to the local service point and register themselves and then proceed to be included actually in database. That way, so we combine the top-down approach and bottom-up approach to make sure that the accuracy of the data is improved. Plus is actually making sure that the updating mechanisms happen twice a year or once a year. Something that I think has been the issues actually in the last couple of years. I think I stop there, Monica. I hope it respond enough to the question.
Yep, very well. So before I move to Ibu Dian and Pak John McCarthy, I just have one or two follow-up questions. So it seems that what you're saying that it's not a problem of design, it's a problem of implementation, right? Including data quality and data coverage. So is the government program or priority of the government right now, it's improving targeting and effectiveness or increasing coverage? How do you balance between the two in terms of improving the targeting versus increasing coverage?
Well, both actually. So because we are aware that both sides or both issues is actually contribute to to the effectiveness of the program, determine the effectiveness of the programs. I think in the times of COVID, we realized that our database, which until now only cover like bottom 40%, and by the way, bottom 40% already cover like 96 million individuals of the Indonesian population. It's really huge data. But again, in the time of the COVID, it is not only that the bottom 40% that adversely affected by the COVID, but even up to perhaps like 50 or even 60%, bottom 60%. So the government has decided to expand the coverage of the database, to 60%, and that's what we're going to do next year. So benefiting with the access to the census and then administrative population data, we'll expand its actual database to cover more population, which is hopefully can cover like bottom 60%. Plus some refining in the methodological sides of the data collection of the PMT and adding actually the on-demand application. But the quality of the implementation of the program need to be improved as well. And we see that that related actually with the design. I give you one example. I think in the beginning of the program, we heard that the Jakarta received the program of the sembako. I think this is the decision is actually to give the Jakartanis and the Bodetabek area, the poor and vulnerable in the Bodetabek area, because they need food. Yeah. So it come out with the good decision, with the good intention. But the decision to give the poor and vulnerable in Jakarta and Bodetabek the in-kind food and different kind of food like dried meat, rice, sardine, and at all, it comes up with the complication of the procurement. They need to do the regular procurement every 2 weeks and distribution for like 10 trillion, 15 trillion. So, and we've been realizing the problem of the bureaucracy in the procuring of all of these things. So we in the COVID situation, we need actually to decide and implement every program very quick. So this is actually, the decision actually come with the implication that going against the nature of the crisis, where we need actually to decide soon. So why not actually, the question is, why not actually giving the benefit in terms of cash? And that's something that actually government changed later. I think starting on July, the benefit that given to the people, to the poor and vulnerable in Jakarta and Bodetabek will be changed into cash.
Okay, thank you, Pak Elan. Let's move to Ibu Dian and Pak John McCarthy. Ibu Dian, would you like to answer the questions on the effectiveness and evaluation of the current stunting campaign and how campaign and behavioral change communication could be strengthened? And also, there's interesting questions on, whether there is a government policy and regulation on processed food, especially those with unhealthy content and high carcinogenic content. So I think that relates to the campaigning programs. Ibu Dian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Actually, for the last question, I have already answered in Q and answer room. But actually, for the monitoring and controlling the carcinogenic food is already implemented by BPOM. So our task is MOH task is doing education to pick the diverse food to fulfill the need of food. So actually we have already doing like Germas, Gerakan Masyarakat Hidup Sehat, which is conducted by 23rd of sector. So the problem of nutrition is not just health, just task of Ministry of Health, but also task of all multi-sectoral tasks. So when we conduct the Gerakan Masyarakat Hidup Sehat, we have doing something, the convergent thing that focus in village, in district or in village. So we conduct same target to do what the functional of the sectoral. So for example, Ministry of Health is educate community by providing media. Then Ministry of Village providing budget. Ministry of Home Affairs providing the regulation, how to conduct the program in the village. So we have already doing this, and then by now we prepare draft of President decree about stunting, to conduct the stunting, to accelerate decreasing stunting. Then this is actually already implemented and nearly finished the decree, the draft. So after this finish, I hope what the problem rise is can be controlling. One more, talking about how to diverse food, we can use utilize our yard to growing vegetables with what we need, and if we have no yard, we can doing as group, so we can growing the vegetable together. Then the result we can share to the group also. Okay, Maria.
Thank you, Widian. Now I'm moving to the second Q&A session. So I will pick some questions from the audience to be answered by speakers. So related to the government's campaign program, so I would like to move to Pak John McCarthy. There's a comment by Ibu Hastuti here that the issues on our diet is not only on the supply side, but behavioral, in particular culture and habit. And also you mentioned in your presentation that, you know, it's the how that is more important in terms of building these diversified food systems. So from your field and background, like what can you say about like changing people's culture and habit in terms of eating more healthy and diversified diet?
Okay, so I guess I've had the pleasure of traveling to Indonesia for about 30 years. I remember when I first went to Indonesia, I used to see all kinds of very varied kind of snacks and very, very varied sorts of foods, a lot of them based on local materials. But over time, these food systems have kind of gone into eclipse or been disappearing. So it's not that people don't necessarily know about diversified foods, but they've been displaced because they're no longer modern. They've no longer got much status. And it's not so easy to revive them, but perhaps this shock is to some degree going to revive them. I think one of the problems when we try and theorize about why local people do what they do, we can come up with very paternalistic ideas about why they do it, but we need to go and sit with them and work out why they actually do it. And I found there's a clear logic to why people cut back on food. It's not necessarily be, it might be because partly they don't know about the importance of food diversity, but it's also because they've got pressing other needs. They've got to pay their children's fee, they've got to pay the money on their mobile phone, they've got to pay for their credit on their motorbike. Now, village people also live in the modern world. They need motorbikes, they need to get to probably their off-farm work or to get their products to market. They need all these things just like we do in the city. So I think we have to avoid being patronising and saying they're making the wrong choices. I mean, sometimes they do, but we need to understand this in much more complex sorts of ways. And I think policy, when we think about it, if we have that kind of understanding, we might be able to target more carefully interventions to help them to diversify their diets.
Okay, thank you, Pak. I think just like one question before I move on to the agriculture side of questions from the audience is that related to what you mentioned. So during this pandemic, when many households lost their incomes, right? Maybe this is also a question to Pak Elan. What are the policy that can help securing nutritious yet perishable food? As people will tend to reduce, more expensive nutrition perishable food to like less nutritious and non-perishable food. Maybe Pak Elan and then also Pak John McCarthy can add.
Maybe Pak Elan first.
Okay, well, that's a very difficult question actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, in my view, I think let's go back is actually to the economic development itself. Yeah. So one is actually to stick focus actually on the social protection, but we know that this is only focusing actually to the bottom group of the population. When we're talking about the not so positive consumption behavior, it's not just a problem within the bottom group. Yeah. So I will say that two ways to address that situation. One, while we need still to continue the efforts is actually to improve the welfare of the overall population. At the same time, I think this is related with the previous question from, I think, Professor Hardinsa, that the government, together with the non-government actors, need to work on the improving actually the knowledge, as well as the awareness with regard of the consuming a more various dietary, more nutritious food, and so on. Yeah, because if we see if we see actually the not so positive or not so good the consumption behavior pattern, it's not just a problem of the poor and then the bottom group of the population. Even among the top 20, among the well-off population group, there's a problem is actually in picking and then consuming, picking the right nutritious foods. Yeah. So it's again for me it's a combination between the moving efforts is actually to improve the welfare, but at the same time it's actually to efforts to improve the knowledge and then the awareness about the nutritious food. And not but not the least, of course, making sure or improving, strengthening actually the access to those more nutritious foods, because that's also a problem actually among the for the Indonesian population. I stop there, Monica.
I just add, I think that was a very
okay, Pak John.
It was a really good answer, but just to add something, I think there's been some interesting experiments with programs to actually help local communities to start growing their own food. I've forgotten the name of the program, but often sometimes when you visit villages, you see these programs to help all the ibu-ibu grow vegetables in empty areas of land. And also, there have been a lot of people I've seen on social media who have started growing vegetables in all sorts of experimental ways in their backyards. So I'm not saying that that's a solution, but there is all kinds of spontaneous initiatives that emerge in times of crisis. And maybe there's some ways that these things can be institutionalized or built on.
Okay, thank you, Pak. So, Pak Elan, you mentioned about access to, this nutritious food, right? I mean, it's not only during pandemic, but it's one of Indonesia's long-term challenges in terms of access to nutritious food. I will go back to Pak Sirojuddin. This is, I think, the big elephant in the room. Like, how do you improve access to diversified food? And also, like, maybe Pak John also can add, the how part to have more diversified food systems. Pak Sirojuddin, you want to answer the question on how, what are like really the practical actions to improve access to diversified food?
Thank you, Bu Monica. Again, this is a big and difficult question. And as Pak John highlighted in the beginning, probably the question of how is one area that needs to be discussed in broader way, rather than what is to be done, but how to do that. So, from our conversation with the various stakeholders in different region, so we see that the access to diversified food is a complex issue, right? It's not only about the whether people. It's about not only about preferences, whether people are willing to consume diversified one. It's also about the availability of food, whether it is available for them, and in the sense that what is easier for them to get. It is easier for them to get fresh and vegetable and say fruit and vegetable, or it is easier for them to get the processed food. That's one of the issues raised by people. And in practical terms, for example, probably people know that, well, it is good to eat fruit and vegetable. But suddenly when we go out our door, the closer for us is not fruit and vegetable, but it's a snack and packaged food and etc. Not only for us, but also for our kids. So to go to the market is, say, it takes a longer step. But well, to buy, say, instant noodle or whatever snack young people will like, it's easy, just few steps. So that's one issue. Another issue is people. I agree with Pak John. Probably the government should look at the how to regulate the advertisement, because TV and etc. have recent I think have shown that it has significant impact on the way people consume. And now actually young children are exposed to many advertisements to this kind of food. So there's a way to do that. But aside from this issue, we believe that knowledge and awareness, even though again, then the structure really matters. Even though people know, but if the situation is easier to get not fresh food, it also matters. But again, knowledge can be also important. So we believe it is also important to improve the knowledge of our, say, posyandu cadre, also PKH cadre, to provide, say, education session for the program recipients, so they know better what kind of food that they need to give to their children. That's one thing that can be improved for our program. And some studies show that program like it's like a food for school children or PROGAS. Some studies show that this kind of program can have a good impact, not only from the food intake from school, but also from the community, if the program is conducted by involving the parents. So they, by implementing the program, not only to provide diversified food for kids, but also to teach the parents how to provide a good food for their families, how to cook a good meal for their families. That's one practical ways that probably we can do, other than regulatory and governance, how to provide food. And also, Pak John said, probably we need to overhaul the agricultural system. Thank you, Bu Monica.
Okay, Pak John, I'm going to give the floor to you. But also, if you can also answers the questions on what could be like the potential roles of the private sector. I mean, given that such campaign to eat less backfire them. So is there room for the role of private sector? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the questions there at the end is, should the government impose tax on food and beverages with high sugar, fat and salt? This has been a controversial issue in many countries, and consumer agencies are trying to push for these sorts of reforms. So Indonesia could be in front and really move in that direction. If these very nutritious, these very poor forms of nutritious food are so cheap and available, and they have got this aura of being modern and attractive, and all the children who go to school want to have one, it's not really helping. Like I saw in that graph that Ibu Dian had, and this is what we also have found, poor households are spending enormous amounts of money on these jajan, more than their protein often they'll spend on the jajan. So this is a critical issue to be addressed, really. And the local food industry, there used to be ibu-ibu in the kampung that used to make snacks, but now there's just these multinational food companies that have gone out into these really remote places and marketing these high sugar, salt and fat products to the poor. It's really hard to watch, actually, and I hope the Indonesian government can really do something about it. It would be wonderful. So the private sector, the question was, they have great data on behaviour, but I think it's also important for the research community in Indonesia to start looking at what's driving these sorts of behaviours. So as well as I'm not sure to what degree the private sector want to share this information. I mean, they're very profit orientated and they've got their own agenda. Maybe they want to, but I think it's time for the Indonesian research community to understand there's a lot of capacity there. So.
Okay, I think from Pak Sirojuddin and Pak John McCarthy, there's a lot of discussion already on the demand side of diversified diets, right? What about from the supply side? Like, how do you incentivize better farmers to produce more diversified food productions, and also policymakers and government to invest more in the supply and value chains for a more diversified food system? Maybe we can start from Pak Sirojuddin and then Pak John.
Thank you, Bu Monica. Honestly, this is one question that we haven't thought much about how to incentivize the farms to produce more diversified farm agriculture. But if you think that the government policy do matter, probably one thing that needs to be thought is how to change the way the government think about the food production. That now, rather than focusing on certain commodities, we should allow the farms to give more incentive to produce more diversified one. And the other thing is that we believe that the research and development in agricultural sector in Indonesia is one of the lowest. So that's I think the areas that the government should do. So to give more support from the farmers to develop more diversified one.
I think that's
Pak John?
That's a really good answer. I think when I used to visit Indonesia back in the 1990s and early 2000s, when I went to lots of remote places, communities had very complex agroforestry systems. You know, they had, if you went to Kalimantan, they had rattan gardens, and it's part of the rattan they would eat, and there were all sorts of things they used to eat. And large parts of these areas have been enclosed by oil palm plantations or somehow degraded. So it's a question too, I know it's not easy to reverse those processes, but how can we go back to these things that people did in the past? And how can we encourage people to go back to, it's like there was a lot of knowledge there in the past and the old people would still have it. I know it's not so easy to go back, but that would be maybe part of a solution. And with the land reform program that Indonesia's got of trying to redistribute areas of land to communities, I think if smallholders are not landowners, they end up giving a third of their production to the landowner, and they're just locked into structural food insecurity or nutritional insecurity, because by the time they've given a third of their harvest over, they're running out of food up to 2 months before the next harvest season. So in places where there's diversified livelihoods, they can go and work in other places, but in more remote places, that's harder. So it's a whole cycle of issues that need to be thought about in an integrated way. We can't just think in an imaginary way. We need to look into specific places, and this is where I think regional government and regional research capacity could be developed to think about these things. And it's going to be really critical thinking about climate change coming down on us, how we can make more resilient food systems at a regional level. Because what might work in East Java is not going to work in Nusa Tenggara, you know?
Okay. There's a questions for Madam Christa. I'm trying to find the questions for Madam Christa here. Maybe Parama, can you give me the question? In the meantime, I want to move to the issues on environment and gender. So there's a question, Pak Sirojuddin, from the audience to have more concrete examples of gender inequality in terms of food security and nutrition. Can you give some concrete examples on gender inequality?
So gender inequality in the agricultural sector. So if we ask who are more likely to get access to agricultural input or credit, for example, it is men or it is female farmers. That's probably one of the questions. Or if we look at the allocation of the within the household, so with more nutritious food, it is male or it is female. So that's say simple question if we would like to know whether the gender inequality persists or not. In terms of land ownership, for example, how is the structure of land ownership? To who mostly land belongs to? It is female or it is male? We realize that to some extent the problem lie on the culture, on the
Sorry, Pak Sirojuddin, I think you're mute.
Sorry.
Sorry,
okay,
muted.
So I think there are simple example how actually gender inequality persists in the agricultural system. So, for example, if we ask ourselves who will get the access to agricultural credit more likely, it is male or male farmers or female farmers. Probably people will say, oh, it depends on who owns the land. But again, the likelihood of farmers to have a land probably is higher for male rather than female. Again, it is difficult problem because to some extent it's beyond the control of the government because probably it lies in the culture. But we believe there is something can be done to address the problem. For example, government can start to provide higher number of penyuluh. So probably the number of the extension workers, it if you compare between male and female, probably there are more male than female to be extension workers. And probably in the official, within agricultural sector, also more male than female. And from experience, we can see that it can be easier for female to communicate and understand the female farms. So that's probably one simple way to better understand how the need of the female farmers and how to better address the situation in the agricultural sector.
Thank you, Pak Sirojuddin. I'm going to give the floor to Ibu Christa to answer the questions from the audience. Madam Christa, do you want to answer the questions from the audience? You are still muted.
What are the questions? They are mostly in Indonesian.
Oh, okay. I also tried to find out what the questions are. I'm still waiting for from the team.
There was an issue on earlier supplementary feeding programs.
Oh,
and maybe I should take this as a hook to give my contribution here. I believe.
Sorry, Ibu. So there's one more question here. Is there a coordination between World Food Program and WTO?
I've seen.
Yeah.
I'll get
Okay.
to it.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
I want to first answer the question on the supplementary feeding program effectiveness. I believe that the best way to address stunting is not to feed the children in centers or give take-home rations. The best is to give knowledge to the mothers and to give sufficient money to the mothers to make their choices. But I believe money is not as important as knowledge. And it is the knowledge about the first 1,000 days of life which has to be emphasized. The pregnancy of the mother and what to eat then in order not to have low birth weight babies that are disadvantaged from the very beginning. Then give the colostrum, adhere to 6 months exclusive breastfeeding, and then give regular diversified diets. But these are tiny amounts. It's not much what these little babies eat. That knowledge is not out there yet. It can be given through the social protection system, through the health system, and that will empower and enable the mothers to feed their children properly. That is from our experiences worldwide. The feeding on site is really for emergencies, but not for regular situations. The other is the work with WHO. Yes, we have been collaborating with WHO on supply chains. This is relevant for food supply chains, which indeed are disrupted. And it's very interesting to listen to what has been found out. For example, the food supply chains within Indonesia are so complicated that it is often easier for the supermarkets to simply import the fruit. That does not stimulate the local production, the local diversified production, away from rice to other commodities. We will look also into other matters in future of supply chain on the cold chains, the vaccines, etc. But that's another story. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Christa. I have two more questions to the panelists. One is about food waste. So, Pak John, I wonder if you can give your views, and maybe others can also give their views as well. The connection between food waste and nutritional deficiency. I mean, this is a really modern issue. Maybe not modern. I mean, people have been wasting food. But I think this is an important one. And also related to environment. Pak Sirojuddin, maybe you can also highlight in this more diversified and resilient food systems that we are building, what are the concrete basically action going forward to make food systems more resilient in terms of environmental, climate change and also other shocks?
So I haven't done much work on food waste. The only thing I would say, maybe other panelists can add, but I've noticed with the, especially with the COVID crisis, a lot of food is being thrown away because of the way the value chains work. There's not cold storage and things perish quickly. So there's been all this discussion about how value chains can be modernized and cold storage can be brought in. So they're all very good ideas, but there's also a downside. If you modernize these value chains, you often displace lots of intermediate traders and ibu that are involved. And also you need a lot of capital to do that. So they could also displace the more vulnerable. So these things are very complicated, and clearly I haven't done research on it, but maybe someone else can add to that.
Okay, Pak Sirojuddin, yeah.
Thank you, Monica. First, regarding the waste, I agree that probably this is more a problem with the urban areas, but even though it's also available in rural areas, but in urban areas, if you look at in development in other countries, for example, there are some organizations or probably driven by regulation that how make the system work for, say, for example, how the supermarket, how the retail system, rather than throwing away the, say, nearly expired food, how to manage this kind of food not to be thrown away. I don't know whether we should give opportunities for non-government organization or charity or whatever. But the point is how to ensure that the food in the chain system are not thrown away, say, a few days before it becomes expired. That one probably one areas that the government and other actors can think about how to reduce the waste. Secondly, related to the climate change, from our, say, discussion with the people in the region, one of the problem is that what they call as sekolah lapang for the farmers. This is the climate, something like education for climate change for the farmers. So in some areas, some such kind of school have been implemented, but due to the the lack of funding, because of there is no much funding for that. So in some areas, this kind of school no stop. So I think it is important to continue such effort to provide better understanding for the farmers to adapt to the climate change. But again, it should be the responsibility should not be given to only farmers, but also other actors. And in this case, even though the government have issued, say, the intention to do climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, but there are still some problems in the way it's implemented. Now the information system within especially in the local government, they know that there should be awareness and knowledge about the climate change and the reduction. But even though the knowledge is circulated, but there is no mechanism to ensure that the policies, not only in the social, not only in, say, the urban areas, but even in the agricultural sector. So there is no mechanism that up there that to make sure that, yes, if you know something about the climate change, if you know something about the disaster, so the government should, the policies should go to certain direction. So I think that's another area that needs to be improved. And finally, again, I think we really need the research and development, how to give us not only better crops, but also better guidance, how to deal with the impact of climate change on food production. Thank you, Bumani.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to give Pak Iván to speak or ask questions, but also I'm wondering if IFAD can share some of their experiences with small farmers, including on the issues of environment and climate change. Pak Iván, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Monica, and thank you all the.
It's terrible. It's good as headphone, but it's terrible as microphone. Thank you, Monica, and thank you all colleagues for this very interesting and strategic views. It was a good opportunity for me to learn as I expected. I would like to mention just two elements, if you allow me, very quickly. And this comes from listening what was said during this event, but also this comes from listening and reading and discussing with different government officers at different levels, mainly, but not only in the Ministry of Agriculture. There was a question that said how to strengthen the governance of food security or of food security systems. And I was thinking while listening that question, but also before and after that in my perception, in general in Indonesia, all what has to be done with public policies is too government-centered. It is clear that the government is the main actor when it comes to designing policies and also to implementing them. But if I were a government officer, a high-level of government officer in the government of Indonesia, and I would listen about the discussions on food production, food security, etc., I would feel myself overwhelmed. Because it seems that in general, the expectations is that the government and the national government mainly, alone or almost alone, has to take all the responsibility. And it won't be, no government will succeed on that. And I will take something that John said, bringing the attention to the local governments, province and district level governments. But I will broaden that even more. What about the farmers? What about the millions of small farmers? What about the private companies? What about the research centers and the universities and the society? So I believe I would like to, this is one of the points that I wanted to mention, because assuming that and understanding that the government is, the national government is the main player when it comes to policy making, of course, it's not the only one, not at all. Now, the second, and I'll take advantage of also a question that I listened during the conversation. There was a question saying how to improve access to diverse and healthy food. And of course, all what was said, I believe, is really important, thorough, strategic, along the responses to that question. But for me, in a very simple way, being someone that worked all his professional life in agriculture and rural development, I would say, the first step is producing diverse and healthy food. Otherwise, the system won't work. This is why a sustainable food systems approach, in our view, and allow me, Christa, to say our, referring not only to IFAD, but also to the World Food Program and to FAO, that is not here, but we work with 3 agencies, UN agencies, work very closely together. When we think on nutrition, when we think on food security, when we think on diverse diet, we think on food systems. So, all the complexities that were mentioned about climate change and about value chains and the distribution channels and all that is essential, is absolutely valid. But if there are no incentives, the necessary incentives to produce healthy and nutritious food, we're not going to get it. Or it will be so expensive because it will be imported that will be impossible to access to 95% of the population or even more. And exactly to the population that has problems in terms of food security and nutrition. So we have to start, sorry, I don't want to be ironic, but we have to start from the beginning. We have to start from creating the conditions and the incentives to produce healthy and nutritious food. These are the 2 points that I wanted to raise. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do it at this point of the workshop. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all panelists and also the audience for the questions and answers. We have come to the end of the Q&A sessions. Before leaving this meeting, I would like to highlight a number of key takeaways from the discussion and the panel session. It is not exhaustive of the very rich discussion that we had, but I just want to point out a few things. So it's clear that we have short-term challenges in this pandemic time, including disruption in both the supply and demand side of food. But we should not lose sight of our long-term challenges. As Mr. Iván said, COVID will last, but it will not last forever. And I would like to highlight a few remaining long-term challenges that were echoed throughout the seminar. The first one is diversifying the food systems. The government should promote diversification to high-value crops beyond rice and other nutrition and to other nutritious food. Mr. Iván mentioned that the food systems should be resilient to climate change and shocks. And one of the first steps is to increase access to diversified food is producing this diversified food. So we have to put necessary incentive for farmers to produce more diversified food. As Pak Sirojuddin mentioned, that there's a need to change in terms of budget allocation to more diversified food production beyond staple crops. And second, increasing productivity and efficiency along the supply and value chains to lower consumers' price without sacrificing producers' price. Consumer prices in Indonesia are still very high compared to the international prices. As Madam Räder mentioned, that 1/3 of Indonesian households cannot afford healthy and diversified diet. Food affordability remains a big challenge. If we can increase food affordability, we can reduce reliance on social protection programs. It is not only an issue of production deficit, we need to increase productivity or intensification. Increasing food productivity and efficiency could also mean less food waste. Moreover, we need investment beyond production, investment in the earlier and later stage of the value chain, including R&D and post-harvest technology, as well as the use of digital technology are needed to increase efficiency along the supply and value chains. And third, diversifying people's diet and knowledge and awareness. So Madam Räder pointed out that one of the remaining challenges is diversified diet. Indonesian diet is far from ideals and still very much dominant on carbohydrates. Protein consumptions remain unequal across different income groups. There's an increased consumption in processed food. Indonesia is facing the triple burden of malnutrition as a result. What is striking here is that overnutrition is not confined to urban areas. In fact, its rate grew fastest among the poorest income groups. As Pak Bambang mentioned, effort towards quality nutrition intake may not need an increase in social protection program, but addressing the lack of knowledge and awareness of quality diet and the first 1,000 days. Effective social and behavioral communication chains, including Germas and Isi Piringku, among other approaches, is very critical. Increased demand and willingness to pay for healthy diet will increase incentive for farmers to produce them. So related to knowledge is also important, I already mentioned that it's also important to increase awareness for farmers to be informed about the need to adapt to climate change and other environmental degradation. So in summary, food security and nutrition agenda is multidimensional. Some aspects have progressed well, but we need to focus on remaining challenges. But John McCarthy said it needs to be integrated also to social and economic policies. Lastly, as echoed by presenter and speakers, there's a need for more collaboration and coordination. Such collaboration and coordination should be more decentralized, as Pak Iván said, especially to local government to take more responsibilities of the agenda. So in this forum, I would like to throw some ideas that we should be thinking on how to work together among academics, research institutes, as well as multilateral organizations, along with policymakers, especially local governments and other stakeholders, to move forward the agenda. Maybe we can initiate a regular forum like this to discuss this very big agenda like we have today. So thank you once again for your participation. Don't forget that the report has just been launched earlier today and is now available for download. and check the link given at the live chat section. Please complete the attendance form and post-event survey form before you leave. Once again, congratulations to SMERU and World Food Program for the report launch. Last but not least, we also like and thank the Knowledge Sector Initiative for their support. Please note that the next Forum Kebijakan Pembangunan webinar will also be on Zoom on Wednesday next week, October 21st. It will discuss the challenges surrounding teachers' recruitment development. Goodbye and see you next week.